Clara Bennett did not cry when her mother signed the paper. She stood in the middle of that dusty Colorado street in the summer of 1885, hands bound at the wrist, and she made herself a promise she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She had been sold, by her own blood, for $40 and a canceled debt. If you've ever been told you were too much and not enough at the same time, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow Clara's story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1885 arrived in Cutters Creek, Colorado, the way it always did, without mercy. The sun hit the main street before 6 in the morning, and didn't let go until the last light bled out behind the Rockies, sometime close to 9. The earth cracked. The creek that gave the town its name ran low and slow brown along the edges. Everything smelled of dry grass and horse sweat, and something faintly rotten underneath, the way small towns sometimes did when the heat stayed too long and people had nothing to do but watch each other and judge. Clara Bennett had lived in Cutters Creek for all 26 years of her life, and she had never once felt like she belonged to it. She stood at the window of the back room of Haskell's General Store, where her stepfather had told her to wait. Her wrists were not bound yet. That came later. For now, she was just standing, looking out at the street through glass so old and warped, it made everything look slightly wrong. The people walking past tilted at strange angles, the buildings leaning the sky, the color of something bruised. She was wearing her good dress, the blue one with the white collar that she'd mended 3 times at the left sleeve. Her mother had told her to put it on that morning, and Clara had obeyed because she had learned over many years that it was easier to obey first and understand later. Her mother's instructions rarely came with explanations. They came with a tone that meant the conversation was already over. She had not eaten breakfast. Her stomach knew something her mind was still refusing to accept. The door behind her opened without a knock. Her stepfather, Roland Haskell, filled the doorframe the way he always did, wide through the shoulders, soft through the middle, with the particular kind of authority that came not from anything he had earned, but from the simple fact that he owned the building and most of the people inside it owed him money. He had small eyes. Clara had always noticed that about him. Small eyes that were always calculating, always counting, always looking at everything and everyone as a number in a ledger. He looked at her now, the way he looked at inventory. "Your mother wants you out front," he said. "What's happening out front? Don't ask questions that don't concern you." "It concerns me if I'm out front," Clara said. Roland's expression shifted, not softened, just shifted. He tilted his head the way he did when he was deciding whether something was worth the effort of correcting. "Margaret Aldridge is here," he said finally, "with her son." Clara's stomach dropped. She knew the name. Everyone in Cutters Creek knew the name. The Aldridges owned the lumber operation 12 miles north of town, a cattle operation east of that, and 3 buildings on Main Street that they rented to people who had no other options. Preston Aldridge was 44 years old, had been married twice. His first wife had died, and his second had left under circumstances. Nobody spoke about directly, but everyone understood, and he had a way of looking at women that made Clara feel like something was crawling up the back of her neck. "Why?" she said, though some part of her already knew. "Because I arranged it," Roland said. "Your mother agreed. You've been sitting in this house long enough, Clara. 26 years old and no prospects, no husband, no children. You're not contributing anything." She heard her own heartbeat slow and loud in the silence that followed. "You arranged a marriage," she said. Not a question, a statement. She needed to hear it out loud to make it real. "A practical arrangement," Roland said. "Aldridge has debts with this store, considerable debts. This settles them, and you get a home. A real home, not a back room." He paused. "You ought to be grateful." The word grateful landed somewhere in her chest and turned into something hard and hot. She thought of 100 things to say. She had always been good at thinking of things to say and stopping herself before she said them, because she had learned that saying things cost more than staying quiet, and she had never had enough to spare for the cost of her own voice. But today, something was different. "I'm not a debt," she said. Roland looked at her for a long moment. His small eyes narrowed slightly. "Go out front, Clara." Her mother was standing on the boardwalk in her Sunday dress, which meant this was an occasion. Margaret Haskell, formerly Margaret Bennett, though she had taken Roland's name within 6 months of their marriage, and seemed to have taken his view of the world. Along with it was a small woman who had somehow managed to make her smallness into a kind of weapon. She stood very straight. She smiled at the right people. She had spent 20 years carefully building a position in Cutter's Creek that depended entirely on nobody looking too closely at how she had gotten there. Clara was one of the things nobody was supposed to look at too closely. Margaret turned when Clara came through the door. Her expression was the particular expression she reserved for Clara, a combination of assessment and disappointment, as if Clara were a piece of work that had never quite come out right. "There you are," Margaret said. "Fix your hair." "What is happening?" Clara said. "Keep your voice down. Mama." Clara stepped closer. She could see past her mother's shoulder. Preston Aldridge, standing near the hitching post, with his hat in his hand. He was watching her with that look, that particular inventory look, and something in Clara's chest pulled tight. "Mama, look at me." Margaret looked at her. In the eyes. For a moment there was something there, some flicker of something that might have been the mother Clara remembered from before Roland, from before the store, from before. Everything shifted, and then it was gone. "This is a good arrangement," Margaret said quietly. "Preston Aldridge is a wealthy man. His last wife left him. His last wife was foolish. Mama. Clara." Her mother's voice dropped even lower, and the flicker of something became nothing at all. "You have nothing. You understand me. You have nothing to offer any man in this town. You are 26 years old. You are plain. You have no dowry. You have no skills that anyone values. You have been a weight around my neck since the day your father died, and I have carried you as long as I am able to carry anything." She paused. She smoothed her skirt. "Preston Aldridge is willing to take you. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand what I am doing for you?" The street was not quiet. Cutter's Creek was never truly quiet in the middle of summer. There were people moving past, going about their morning business. Mrs. Dre from the millinery. 2 cowboys off the Kessler Ranch. 3 children chasing something in the dust. Old Tom Purcell sitting on his bench outside the barber shop like he had sat every morning for 30 years. People moved, people talked. The usual sounds of a town that had somewhere to be. But Clara felt in that moment as though every single one of them had slowed down. As though they were all watching from the edges of her vision, careful not to look directly, but careful not to miss anything either. "You're selling," Clara said. Her mother's jaw tightened. "I am securing your future. Roland owed him money. You're settling a debt with me." "That is not—" "How much?" Clara said. "How much am I worth?" The silence that followed was the answer. Her mother did not say the number. She did not need to. The fact that there was a number was enough. Preston Aldridge stepped forward. He had put his hat back on. He was smiling the way men smiled when they had already made a decision and were only waiting for the formality of agreement to catch up. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I hope you'll allow me to—" "I haven't agreed to anything," Clara said. Preston's smile held. "Your family has spoken on your behalf." "I am 26 years old," Clara said. "I can speak on my own behalf." "Clara." Her mother's voice was a warning. "You had no problem telling Mrs. Dre I was useless last April," Clara said, and she was surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "You told Reverend Cole I was a burden at Christmas. I heard you. You didn't know I was in the hallway, but I heard you." She looked at her mother. "You said you didn't know what you were going to do with me. Well, now you've figured it out. You're going to hand me to a man I don't know for money I'll never see, and call it securing my future." The street had gone quieter. Not silent. There were still sounds, still movement, but the people nearest to them had stopped pretending not to listen. "You're making a scene," her mother said through her teeth. "You've been making one for 26 years, Clara said. "I just never said so out loud before." Preston Aldridge's smile finally shifted. He was not the kind of man who was accustomed to this kind of conversation. And Clara could see that he was calculating not in the way Roland calculated, but in a simpler and somehow colder way. He was deciding whether she was worth the trouble. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice dropping into something that was meant to sound reasonable and landed somewhere considerably less pleasant. "I am offering you a home. A comfortable home. You'll want for nothing." "I'll want for myself," Clara said. "That's the one thing you can't give me." "Clara," Roland's voice from somewhere behind her. "That's enough." "Roland." "I said that is enough." She felt his hand close around her arm. Not gently. The way you held something you owned. And the crowd that had gathered, and it was a crowd now, she could see it clearly. People she had known her whole life. People who had bought goods from her stepfather's store and nodded to her in the street and looked past her at church. The crowd watched and said nothing and did not move. That was the thing that Clara would carry with her longest. Not her mother's words, not Roland's grip, not Preston Aldridge's smile. The stillness of the crowd, the way they watched and said nothing and did nothing, and stood there in the summer heat with their lives already decided and let it happen. She did not cry. She had made herself that promise. But she looked out at those faces, women who had daughters, men who had wives, people who understood at some level what they were witnessing, and she felt something inside her that had always been quietly present become something sharp and clear. She was alone. She had always been alone. And the only question remaining was whether she was going to walk toward Preston Aldridge's wagon, or whether something in her was going to refuse. She was still trying to answer that question when she heard the horse. Not the usual sound of horses on the main street of Cutter's Creek. The clop and jangle of animals accustomed to traffic moving. The way town horses moved slow and bored and headed somewhere predictable. This was different. This came from the north end of the street from the direction of the mountain road, and it had a different sound, heavier, faster. The sound of an animal that was used to open ground and was not particularly interested in slowing down for anyone. People moved out of the way before they even turned to look. There was something in the sound that made them move first and ask questions later. The horse was a big roan stallion, the color of dried blood, with a chest like a barrel and legs that ate up ground in long, unhurried strides. The man on its back did not look like he was in a hurry either. He sat easy the way men sit who have spent more hours in a saddle than out of one, with his hands loose on the reins and his eyes on the street ahead. He was taking in the scene the way you take in something you're not part of. Reading it the way you'd read sign on a trail, looking for what it meant. How was tall even on horseback. Dark-haired, with a hat that had seen considerable weather and a beard that sat close along his jaw. He wore a plain canvas shirt and work pants, no fringe, no silver. Nothing that said he was trying to look like anything in particular. He looked like a man who had been working outdoors for so long that the outdoors had just become the default condition. He stopped the roan about 30 feet from where Clara stood. He looked at her, then at Roland's hand on her arm, then at Preston Aldridge, then back at Clara. Then he looked at the crowd, and something in his expression made the crowd shift. "What's the occasion?" he said. His voice was level. Not loud, but it carried the way voices carry when the person speaking is not accustomed to being ignored. Nobody answered immediately. There was the particular silence of a crowd that wants someone else to go first. Roland spoke. "This is a private matter. Move along." The man on the horse did not move along. He swung down from the saddle in a single motion, landed easy, dropped his reins over the hitching post closest to him. He walked toward the group, not fast, not slow, and he kept his eyes on Clara the whole way. "You all right, ma'am?" he said. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. Nobody had asked her that. Not today. Not in a very long time. "She's fine," Roland said. "I told you this is a private." "I asked the lady," the man said. He looked at Roland's hand on Clara's arm. "And I notice you've got a hold of her that she doesn't seem to have agreed to. Now listen here." Preston Aldridge started. "No," the man said simply. Not angry, not heated, just final the way a door closes. "I don't think I will." He looked at Roland until Roland's hand came off Clara's arm. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was something quieter than that, and more certain. Roland's hand came off because something in the man's face made the alternative seem like a genuinely bad idea. Clara rubbed her arm. She was looking at this stranger, this man she had never seen in her life, and she was trying to understand what was happening. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her. Up close, his eyes were a dark kind of gray, the color of the sky before the weather changed. "Ethan Walker," he said. "I run a place up on the North Ridge, couple hours ride." He glanced at Preston, then back at her. "What's going on here, if you don't mind my asking?" Before Clara could answer, her mother stepped forward. "This is none of your concern, Mr. Walker. My daughter has agreed to a marriage." "I haven't agreed to anything," Clara said again, "and you are interfering in a family matter." "Marriage requires the woman's consent," Ethan said. "He said it the way you say something that shouldn't need to be said. That's the law." "In this town," Roland said, recovering himself, now drawing up to his full height, "I am the law and—" "No," Ethan said again. "You're a storekeeper." He turned to look at the crowd. He looked at them for a long moment, not accusing, not contemptuous, just looking the way you look at something you want to see clearly. "Somebody here want to say something different. Because from where I'm standing, I see a woman being held against her will in front of the whole town, and I'm having trouble finding anyone who looks troubled by it." Silence. Old Tom Purcell on his bench outside the barber shop looked down at his boots. The women by the millinery looked at each other. The cowboys off the Kessler ranch looked somewhere that wasn't here. Ethan nodded, like he'd gotten the answer he expected. He turned back to Clara. "Ma'am," he said, "I can't make any decisions for you, and I'm not going to try. But if you want to leave here, if that's what you want, your choice, nobody else's, I can take you somewhere safe." He paused. "And if you want to stay, I'll make sure you're able to stay without anyone's hand on your arm." Clara looked at him. She looked at her mother. She looked at Preston Aldridge, whose smile was entirely gone, now replaced by something tight and cold. She looked at the crowd, still watching, still silent. She thought about the back room at Haskell's General Store, where she had been told to wait. She thought about 26 years of waiting. She thought about her mother's voice saying "You are a weight around my neck," and Roland's hand on her arm, and the way $40 settled a debt, and a person could be two sides of the same coin, both the payment and the thing being paid for. She thought about the wagon she would have climbed into if this man had not ridden down from the mountain. She picked up the small bag she had been carrying. She had not even realized until this moment that she had brought it out with her, that some part of her had known she might not be coming back. "I want to leave," she said. Her mother made a sound. Not a word. A sound. "Clara." "I want to leave," Clara said again. She walked to where Ethan's roan was tied. She didn't look back at her mother. She didn't look back at Roland or Preston or the crowd. She heard her mother's voice behind her, higher now, less composed. "Clara, if you walk away from this, I cannot help you. Do you understand me? I cannot—" "I know," Clara said. She kept walking. Ethan untied his horse and walked it to where she stood. He looked at her bag, then at her. "Can you ride?" he said. "A little," she said. "Not well." He nodded. "You'll ride up front then. I'll take the back." He hesitated. "Is that agreeable to you?" The question was so simple, so plain, so entirely unlike every other question she had been asked that day that it almost knocked the breath out of her. "Yes," she said. "That's agreeable." He helped her up onto the roan, his hands at her waist, brief and businesslike, and then swung up behind her. He took the reins past her shoulders. The horse shifted under them, and Clara gripped the saddle horn with both hands. "I'm going to ask you something," Ethan said from behind her. His voice was quieter now, closer, meant just for her. "All right," she said. "You're sure about this?" She looked out at the main street of Cutter's Creek, Colorado, in the summer of 1885. The people she had known her whole life. The place she had been born and raised and had never felt welcome. The dust and the cracked earth and the warped glass windows. Her mother was still standing on the boardwalk. She was not moving. She was not calling out anymore. She was just watching with an expression that Clara could not quite read from here. Anger, maybe. Grief, maybe. Something that had passed the point of expression and become simply a fact. Clara turned away from her. "I'm sure," she said. Ethan clicked his tongue. The roan moved. They rode north out of Cutter's Creek onto the mountain road that climbed through pine and scrub into the high country. The air changed almost immediately, cooler, cleaner, carrying the smell of pine resin and cold water, and something Clara didn't have a word for. Something that was just the smell of space, of room, of a world that went on beyond the boundaries of the town she had grown up in. She did not speak for a long time. Ethan did not push her to. The road was rough. She focused on staying steady in the saddle. The roan moved with a long, even rhythm, and behind her she could feel Ethan's presence, solid, unhurried, keeping the horse on the path without any apparent effort. After perhaps an hour, when the town was long behind them and the road had narrowed to a track between stands of aspen, Clara spoke. "Why did you do that?" she said. A pause. Long enough that she wondered if he was going to answer. "Seemed like the thing to do," he said. "You don't know me." "No." "You could have ridden right past." "Could have." She waited. "Didn't seem right," he said. Man putting his hands on a woman who hasn't asked to be touched. Crowd just watching. None of it seemed right. "People let things happen all the time," Clara said. "That's not unusual." "I know," he said. "That's why it seemed like the thing to do. Because it wasn't going to stop on its own." She thought about that. The roan moved steadily upward. "I have nothing," she said. "I want you to understand that. I have the clothes I'm wearing, and whatever's in this bag, and I have no money and no particular skills that anyone has ever seen fit to value." She paused. "If you're expecting anything in return for this, I think you should say so now." Another long pause. "I'm not expecting anything," Ethan said. "I've got a spare room. You can stay until you figure out where you want to go next. And then you go where you want to go. That's the point." She didn't know what to do with that. It was such a simple answer, such a complete answer. She had been bracing for conditions for the thing underneath the offer, the thing that would come out later when she was in no position to refuse, and there were none. Or at least, there appeared to be none, and she had learned to distrust appearances, but the plainness of his voice when he said it made it difficult to disbelieve. She didn't believe him entirely. She was not capable of that yet. But she filed it away in the place where she kept things she didn't know what to do with yet. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. The mountain road curved. Cutter's Creek disappeared entirely behind the ridgeline. Clara had not cried yet. She was not going to cry. But she pressed her lips together and looked at the pines moving past her, and felt for the first time in as long as she could remember that she did not know what was going to happen next. It was the most terrifying feeling she had ever had. It was also underneath the terror. Something else. Something she did not have a name for yet. Something that felt in the smallest and most cautious way, like the first breath after a long time underwater. Ethan Walker's place on the North Ridge was not what Clara had been expecting. She was not entirely sure what she had been expecting. Something rough, perhaps, a lean-to. Something that communicated a man living out here alone did not particularly value his surroundings. What she found instead was a cabin built with the same practical care that ran through everything she had so far observed about Ethan Walker. The logs were fitted close, the chinking neat. There was a porch, and the porch had a good solid railing that had been made to last. The yard was not ornamental, but it was organized, woodpile stacked and covered tools in their places. A kitchen garden along the south wall that someone had taken time and trouble with. There was a barn. There were horses in it. 3 others besides the roan. There was a chicken yard. There were goats. It was a working place. A place that a person had thought about and built and continued to think about over time. She stood in the yard after Ethan helped her down from the horse, and she turned slowly, looking at all of it. "You built this," she said. "Most of it." He was untacking the roan, moving with the efficiency of habit. "1 room at a time over the years." "How long have you been up here?" he considered. 7 years, give or take. She looked at the care in the construction. at the way the whole place had the feeling of something built by someone with time to think about what they were doing and why. "Alone," she said. He did not answer immediately. He finished with the saddle, hung it on its peg, ran his hands along the roan's back. "Alone," he said. She heard in the single word something that was not an answer, but not quite a refusal to answer either. Something that had weight to it. She did not push. "Come on in," he said. "I'll get some coffee going." The inside of the cabin was one large room. The spare room he'd mentioned, she realized must be separated by the curtain. She could see along the far wall with a stone hearth and a table and chairs that had been made by hand. There were books on a shelf by the window. More books than she had expected. She counted without meaning to 17. There was a rifle on the wall. There were no decorations. There were curtains on the windows, plain, simple, faded, and she wondered about them because they did not seem like something a man alone would have put up. And then she stopped wondering because she understood that there were things she did not know about Ethan Walker, and she had not earned the right to know them yet. He put coffee on. He moved around the kitchen side of the room with the same unhurried efficiency he brought to everything. And Clara stood near the door because she had not been invited to sit, and she was not going to assume. "Sit down," he said without looking up from what he was doing. She sat. He brought 2 mugs and sat across from her at the table. He did not look at her with the inventory look. He just looked at her the way you look at someone you're talking to. "You're hungry," he said. "I'm all right." "You haven't eaten." She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Way people look when they haven't eaten," he said. "Same way an animal looks." He was up again before she could respond, moving to the larder. "Don't argue about it. It's not a favor. You're going to need your strength, and there's food here." She watched him. He put together something simple, cornbread, cold beans, some dried meat, and put it in front of her without ceremony. She ate. She had not realized how hungry she was until the first bite. She ate carefully with whatever dignity she could manage, and Ethan drank his coffee and looked out the window and gave her the extraordinary courtesy of not watching her. When she was done, she looked at the empty plate and felt something in her chest that was too complicated to name. She looked across the table at this man. She did not know this stranger who had pulled her out of the middle of Cutter's Creek and brought her up a mountain and put food in front of her without asking for anything. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked. "If you don't mind my asking." He looked back from the window. He thought about it. "It's quiet," he said. "That's not the whole answer." "No," he said. "It's not." He turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. It was the first gesture she had seen him make that wasn't entirely purposeful. "I had a family," he said. "Wife. We lost the baby early on. Then she took sick in the winter of 78. By spring she was gone." He said it the way you say things you have said before, not with the rawness of fresh grief, but with the particular flatness of something you have carried long enough to know its exact weight. "I tried to stay in town a while after. Couldn't do it. Too many places that were the wrong shape without her in them. Came up here." Clara looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said. 7 years ago," he said. "I've made my peace with it, or something close enough to peace." He looked up. "I'm not looking for sympathy." "I'm not offering sympathy," she said. "I'm offering what it's worth, which is what you deserve." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, not much, not visibly, but she felt it the way you feel a change in the air before weather. "There's a room behind that curtain," he said. "It's small, it's dry, and it's clean. There's a lock on the inside." He held her gaze. "That lock is yours to use whenever you want to use it. Nobody's going to ask you to explain it." Clara looked at the curtain, then back at him. She had been told things before. She had been told that her best interests were what mattered. She had been told that people were doing things for her. She had been told a great many things, and experience had taught her to measure words against actions and wait accordingly. But the curtain was there, and the lock he mentioned would be on the inside. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, drank his coffee. Outside, the summer afternoon stretched long and golden over the ridge, and somewhere far below Cutter's Creek was going about its business, and Clara Bennett was sitting at a table in a cabin on a mountain with a man she did not know, and nothing about her life was the same as it had been this morning. She thought about her mother's voice. "You are a weight around my neck." She pressed her hand flat on the table, feeling the grain of the wood. Solid. Real. She was still here. Whatever came next, she was still here. And for the first time in 26 years, no one was holding her arm. She did not sleep the first night. That was not unusual. Clara had spent years in the back room of Haskell's General Store, listening to the sounds of a house that did not want her in it. Roland's heavy footsteps. Her mother's careful silences. The particular quiet of a place where people shared walls, but not warmth. She knew how to lie still and wait for morning. She was good at it. But this was a different kind of wakefulness. She lay on the narrow bed behind the curtain in Ethan Walker's cabin, in the small room that smelled of pine and old wool, and something faintly like cedar, and she stared at the ceiling in the dark and listened to sounds she did not recognize. The wind in the pines outside. An owl somewhere far down the ridge. The occasional shift of horses in the barn. Sounds that were not threatening sounds that were in fact profoundly peaceful, but that belonged to a world she did not yet know how to read. She reached out in the dark and touched the door beside the bed. Found the latch. Felt the bolt's solid iron on her side of it. Nobody's going to ask you to explain it. She had not locked it. She realized that now, lying there in the dark. She had gone behind the curtain and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the latch for a long time, and then she had simply not used it. She was not sure why. Trust was too strong a word for what she felt about Ethan Walker after a single afternoon. She did not trust him. She did not trust anyone. But she had watched him move around the cabin all evening, making supper, tending the fire, reading by the window with one of those 17 books, and he had not once moved toward her, not once said anything that required her to be careful, not once made her feel like she was being watched in the way she was accustomed to being watched. He had said goodnight from the other side of the curtain. Quiet, plain. Like it was nothing. Like having a woman in his spare room was the most ordinary thing in the world. She pressed her fingers against the latch and did not lock it, and eventually, somewhere close to dawn, she slept. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of an axe. Clara sat up, oriented herself, and listened. The axe was rhythmic, a steady crack and split, coming from outside, from the direction of the woodpile she had noticed when they arrived. She could hear the birds too, and the wind, and the particular quality of morning silence that was nothing like the silence she was used to. This was a silence that had things in it. Good things. She dressed quickly and went out. Ethan was at the woodpile, his back to her, working with the methodical rhythm of someone who did this every morning. He did not perform it. He did not look up and greet her with it. He was just doing a thing that needed doing the way he seemed to do everything. She stood on the porch and looked at the morning. The air hit her face, cool, carrying pine, and the faint iron smell of altitude, and she breathed it in and held it. "Coffee's on the stove," he said without turning around. "How did you know I was there?" she said. "Porch board creaks," he said. "Third one from the door." She looked down at the board under her feet. She went inside and poured herself coffee and brought a second mug out to the porch railing. She was not sure why she did that. She did it without thinking. When Ethan came up from the woodpile a few minutes later, he saw the mug on the railing. He looked at it. Then he picked it up and drank and sat on the top porch step and said nothing at all. It was, Clara thought, one of the more comfortable silences she had ever been part of. That was the beginning. She told him on the third day that she wanted to earn her keep. She said it at breakfast directly because she had decided in the night that the worst thing would be to let uncertainty build until it became something neither of them could move around. She put down her fork and said, "I need to be useful. Tell me what needs doing." Ethan looked at her. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know that," she said. "This isn't about owing. I've spent my entire life being called useless. I'd like to find out if that's true." Something moved behind his eyes. He thought about it in the way he thought about everything, not quickly but seriously. "Can you cook?" he said. "Better than you," she said. A pause. The ghost of something that might have been a smile. "Fair enough," he said. The garden needs weeding. The chickens need feeding every morning. I'll show you how to milk the goats." He picked up his fork. "If you're willing." "I'm willing," she said. She was. What she had not expected was how willing she was, how much her hands wanted to be busy, how much the simple act of doing necessary things would feel like something returning to her. Some part of herself she had not known was missing. She weeded the garden on her hands and knees in the summer heat, and felt with each stubborn root. She pulled something loosen in her chest that had been pulled tight for a very long time. The goats did not take to her immediately. One of them, a mean-eyed old nanny, who Ethan had not named because he was apparently a man who did not name things that didn't name themselves, bit her on the hand the first morning, drawing blood. Clara held her ground. She did not step back. She looked the goat in the eye and said with considerable feeling, "That is not going to become a habit." Ethan, coming around the corner of the barn, with a harness over his shoulder, stopped when he heard her. He took in the scene: Clara the goat, the blood on her hand, the absolute determination in her face. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You can name her if you want." "I'm going to call her Margaret," Clara said. She heard the sound he made. A short sound, quickly controlled. It took her a moment to realize it was a laugh, the first one she had heard from him, and it was the kind of laugh that came out despite a person's best intentions to keep it in. She felt the warmth of it in a place she had not expected to feel anything. By the end of the first week, she had a routine. By the end of the second, she had calluses she hadn't had before, a working knowledge of every animal on the property, and an opinion about where the garden needed more attention that she shared with Ethan over supper on a Wednesday evening. He listened. He asked 2 questions. He changed what she suggested because it turned out she was right. Nobody had ever done that before. She sat with that knowledge later behind the curtain, while the mountain dark came down outside the small window. Nobody had ever just listened, asked questions, changed course because she had made a good point. The smallness of it, the enormity of it. She pressed her hands together in her lap and tried to understand what she was feeling. It was something like being seen. She did not have a better word for it. On a Tuesday morning, in the 3rd week, she was in the kitchen garden when she heard horses on the mountain road. More than one, moving with the particular speed of people who had somewhere specific to be and had decided they were going to get there. She stood up. Ethan came out of the barn. They both heard it at the same moment, and they both went still in the same moment, and Clara felt the specific cold that moved through her. Not fear exactly, not yet, but the knowledge of fear, the recognition of its shape before it arrived. 3 riders came into the yard. She knew 2 of them. The third was a man she didn't recognize, broad with a deputy's badge on his chest that caught the morning sun. Roland Haskell sat his horse with the particular dignity of a man who has decided that dignity is the appropriate posture for getting what he wants. Preston Aldridge sat beside him, and the deputy sat slightly behind, not looking at Clara, but at Ethan in a way that was meant to communicate something. "Miss Bennett," Roland said, "I'm relieved to see you're unharmed." Clara said nothing. "Your mother has been worried sick," Roland continued. "We've come to bring you home." The word home landed in the yard between them like something thrown hard. Ethan had moved without appearing to hurry to a position slightly forward and to Clara's left. He wasn't between her and the riders. He was beside her. The difference mattered. "She came here of her own choosing," Ethan said. "She can leave of her own choosing. That's the beginning and the end of it." "With respect, Mr. Walker," Roland said, "you took advantage of a distressed young woman." "He did nothing of the kind," Clara said. Roland looked at her. The looking was a performance-concerned stepfather, worried family come to retrieve the lost lamb. She had seen that expression before. She had been unable before to name what was underneath it. She could name it now. Underneath the performance was the same thing that was always underneath it. Property. The word. The assumption. The absolute bedrock certainty that she was a thing that could be directed. "Clara." His voice shifted to something softer, more private, as if by lowering his volume, he could make this a family conversation instead of what it was. "Your mother is heartbroken. You left without a word. Come home. We can speak to Mr. Aldridge. The arrangement doesn't have to be. No, Clara said. Exactly as we discussed. There's room to... No, she said again. Miss Bennet. Preston Aldridge spoke for the first time. His voice had none of Roland's softness. He had apparently decided that the performance was not going to work and had moved directly to the next thing. My arrangement with your family is a legal matter. There are papers, signed papers. There are no papers I signed, Clara said. Your stepfather signed on your behalf. He had no right to sign on my behalf. The law says otherwise. Ethan's voice came in then level and certain. What law? Preston looked at him. Property law. Household contract. She's not property, Ethan said. And a household contract signed without the agreement of the person it concerns isn't worth the paper it's on. You're welcome to take that to a federal judge and see how far it gets you. He paused. The deputy there knows that, don't you, deputy? The deputy shifted in his saddle. He was a young man Clara saw now, younger than she'd initially thought, with the look of someone who had ridden out here because he'd been told to, and was now reconsidering the wisdom of that decision. Mr. Walker, the deputy said, there's been a complaint filed. About what? Ethan said. About the removal of Miss Bennet from... She walked out of Cutter's Creek on her own 2 feet in front of the whole town, Ethan said. Anyone who was standing on Main Street that morning can tell you that. He looked at Roland. Including the men who work for you, Roland. You want to put this in front of a court? Then let's put it in front of a court. Let's hear what the whole town says about what they saw. Roland's composed expression developed a crack, because the whole town had seen. That was the thing. That was the specific vulnerability in their position, and Ethan had found it and put his finger on it in 30 seconds, and Roland had not expected that. Preston Aldridge looked at Clara. The look was cold and particular. You're going to regret this, he said. Not a threat, a prediction. Something almost worse. I already regret the years I spent afraid of men like you, Clara said. Her voice was steady. She realized, genuinely surprised by how steady it was. So you're not offering me anything new. The 3 riders looked at each other. Some communication passed between Roland and Preston, quick, unhappy. The deputy cleared his throat. I can't compel her to leave if she says she's here of her own free will. She is, Ethan said. She is, Clara said. They left. Clara watched them ride out of the yard and back toward the mountain road, and she did not move until the sound of their horses had faded entirely. Then she let out the breath she had been holding since the moment she'd heard them coming. Ethan stood beside her. You did that, he said. Not me. You were here, she said. I was here, he said. You spoke. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the road where the riders had gone, and she studied his profile, the set of his jaw, the particular stillness he carried everywhere, and she thought about the space between being rescued and being supported. She had thought before today that she knew what rescue felt like. She had seen it in her mind, a version of this morning where Ethan stepped in front of her and handled it, and she stood behind and was grateful. That was the version she had been prepared for. This had not been that version. He had stood beside her and let her speak and backed up everything she said. She did not know yet what to do with the difference, but she felt it all the way down. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. You don't need to thank me for that. I want to, she said. I want to thank you for exactly what you did, which is stand next to me and let me be a person. He was quiet for a moment. That's not a favor, he said. That's just how it ought to be. She looked away, pressed her lips together. You'd be surprised, she said, how rarely it is. That night after supper, Ethan took one of the 17 books from the shelf and set it on the table between them. It was not a large book. It had a red cover worn soft at the corners. He opened it to the first page and turned it so it faced her. Can you read? He asked. She shook her head. The shame of it had never left her, a specific deep shame, the kind that came from being told repeatedly that the absence of something was your own fault. Her family had not seen to her education the way they had seen to other things. She had been needed for work, and work did not require letters. My wife couldn't read when we married, Ethan said. I taught her. He said it simply. No performance of generosity, just information. It's not difficult, it takes time. She looked at the page. The letters were a pattern she had learned over years to look past, to let her eyes slide away from, so she didn't have to feel the particular sting of her own blankness in front of them. Why? She said. He looked at her. Why would you do that? She said. Teach me. He thought about it. Because you're here, he said. And because you're clearly not stupid. And because a person ought to be able to read. He paused. And because you said you wanted to find out if you were useless. This is one way to find out. She looked at the book. She had not done many things in her life that were purely for herself. She had not been allowed to. The idea of claiming something, of sitting at a table and deciding she deserved a thing that had always been kept from her, felt enormous and terrifying, and also somewhere underneath like pressing on a bruise that had been there so long she had stopped noticing the pain. She reached out and touched the page. All right, she said. He sat down across from her, and they began. Oh. It was slow. It was frustrating. There were nights when Clara wanted to throw the book across the room, and twice she said so out loud. And both times Ethan said, then throw it, without looking up from his own reading. And both times she decided not to, because throwing it would mean giving up, and she had already given up enough things in her life. But there were other moments. The night she sounded out a full sentence for the first time, slow, uncertain, piecing each word together, like something breakable, and looked up at Ethan across the table with an expression she couldn't control. Something cracked open on her face, something she couldn't have named. He didn't make a production of it. He looked at her and nodded once. There it is, he said. But his voice when he said it was different. Not softer exactly, but something. She went behind the curtain that night and pressed her back against the wall and felt the words she had read moving through her chest, like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples of it going out in all directions. She did not cry. She was going to hold to that promise she'd made to herself. But her eyes burned, and she let them burn, and after a while the burning became something warmer and simpler. Pride. That was the word. She was learning that too, not just the words in the book, but the words for things inside her that had never been named before. The summer deepened. The work of the ranch was constant, and Clara had thrown herself into it with the particular intensity of someone who had been told their whole life they were not capable, and had decided that the only way to answer that was to do the thing. She learned the goats, all of them, even Margaret, who remained combative but had stopped biting after Clara established that she would stand her ground indefinitely and was willing to wait the goat out. She learned the horses cautiously with Ethan beside her, showing her how to approach and what to watch for and where to put her hands. The first morning, he put her up on a horse alone, a steady bay mare named Juno, who was, he said, approximately the most patient animal he had ever known. Clara gripped the saddle horn until her knuckles ached and did not ask him to take her down. Hands lighter, he said from the fence. She can feel your fear through the reins. How do you make your hands lighter when you're scared? Clara said. You decide to, he said. She looked at him. That was not, she thought, a particularly helpful instruction. But she loosened her grip by degrees, by conscious decision, one finger at a time, and something in Juno's walk below her changed, eased, and Clara felt the shift and understood it. She relaxed, Clara said. You relaxed, Ethan said. He was right. She knew he was right the moment he said it. She walked Juno around the paddock and felt the rhythm of it entering her, the movement, the air, the sense of being carried, and she thought, I am doing something I could not do before. It was not a large thought. It was the most significant thought she had had in years. On a hot July afternoon, when the sky had gone the particular hard blue of deep summer, Clara found the photograph. She had not been looking for anything. She was cleaning. Ethan had said she didn't need to. She did it anyway, and she moved the books on the shelf to dust behind them, and tucked between the last two books was a photograph, the stiff, formal kind, the kind taken at a studio with a painted backdrop. A man and a woman. The man was recognizably Ethan Younger without the beard, with something in his posture that was the same, and something in his face that was not the same at all. Something open. Something that had not yet been shut. The woman beside him was smiling. A real smile, not a posed one. She was looking at the camera, but her smile was tilted slightly sideways, like she was sharing a private joke with someone just off frame. Clara held the photograph and looked at it for a long time. She set it back carefully exactly where it had been. She did not say anything about it that evening. She served supper, and they ate, and the conversation moved as it had begun to move more naturally between topics. The horses, the book. The weather moving in from the west, whether the kitchen garden needed more water. But later. When she went behind the curtain, she lay on her bed and thought about the woman in the photograph. The way she had been smiling. The way Ethan had been standing beside her close easy, like someone who expected to be standing there for a very long time. She thought about 7 years of mornings alone on this ridge. She thought about 17 books on a shelf. She thought about curtains that a man alone had put up in a spare room, and about a lock on the inside of a door, and about the way Ethan Walker treated every person and every living thing on this property with the kind of matter-of-fact decency that was not performed and not calculated, but simply present like the stone in the walls of the cabin, part of what the whole structure was built from. She turned onto her back and looked at the dark ceiling. She was not sure what she was feeling. It was complicated and layered, and she did not have all the words for it yet, although she was collecting more words every night across the table with the red-covered book between them. She knew this much. She had come to this mountain expecting nothing to be different, expecting this man to be a version of every other man she had known. The demand underneath the kindness, the grip under the offered hand. She had been waiting for it every day. Bracing. Ready. It had not come. She was beginning to believe that it was not going to come. And that belief, fragile, uncertain, built from weeks of small evidence, was the most frightening thing she had encountered since she walked out of Cutter's Creek, because if she let herself believe it, and she was wrong, the fall would be much farther than anything she had survived before. But she was beginning to believe it. That was the truth of where she was. 2 days after she found the photograph, she asked him. She did not plan to ask. They were at the table, an ordinary evening. The book opened between them, her finger tracing a line of print, and the question came out of her before she had decided to let it. What was her name? He went still. She kept her eyes on the page. Your wife, she said. I saw the photograph. I didn't mean to. I was cleaning. A long pause. Eliza, he said. She looked kind. She was. He was quiet. She was the kindest person I ever knew. Not in a soft way. She was kind the way a good tool is good, useful, reliable, the real thing. He paused. She would have liked you. Clara looked up. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the table, his hands around his coffee mug. Why? She said. Because you don't quit, he said. She respected that above most things. She didn't quit either. He looked up, and for a moment there was something in his face that was not the usual careful stillness, something closer to the surface. She died in March. The sickness took her fast. 14 days from the first fever to the end. I kept thinking there would be more time. There wasn't. He stopped. I'm sorry. You didn't ask for all of that. I asked for all of it, she said. That's why I asked. He looked at her. People keep asking me how I am, he said. Folks from town occasionally. The Kessler hands when they pass through. I tell them I'm fine. It's easier. I'm not asking how you are, Clara said. I'm asking who you are. There's a difference. Something shifted in his face again. She was learning to read him slowly, the way she was learning the letters in the book. One careful recognition at a time. His face did not change easily or often, but when it did, the changes were genuine. I don't know that anyone's ever said it to me that way, he said. Then it's past time, she said, and went back to the book. But her hands were not entirely steady on the page, and she thought he probably noticed because he noticed everything. He did not say so. He let her have the small fiction of composure. She was beginning to understand that this was a thing he did give her room without making her feel the size of it. 3 weeks into August, with the heat sitting heavy on the ridge and the afternoon sky building toward thunder. Every day, without quite delivering it, Ethan asked her to come with him to check the fence on the north pasture. It was a practical request. The fence had been showing wear, and he wanted a second pair of eyes on the posts. Clara had become his second pair of eyes on many things by now, comfortable with that role, competent in it, and she came without question. They were an hour out from the cabin, working along the fence line in companionable silence, when Ethan stopped. He stood very still. Clara stopped beside him. She followed his gaze and saw at the far edge of the pasture 3 men on foot, moving toward the fence from the outside. She had not seen them before she looked where he was looking. They had not been there 5 minutes ago. They were not Kessler hands. She did not recognize any of them. They were carrying tools. Not weapons tools. But they were working at the fence line, and the work they were doing was not repair. "What are they doing?" she said low. "Cutting wire," Ethan said. His voice had gone entirely flat. "Why?" "That's the question," he said. He started toward them. Clara followed because she was not going to stand there and wait, and because she had stopped doing things simply because they were safe. The men saw them coming and did not run. That was the first thing Clara noticed. They had the look of people who had been sent here, who had expected to be seen, who were not worried about it. The one in the center, older with a foreman's way of standing, looked at Ethan with the particular blankness of a man delivering a message he didn't write. "Walker," he said. "This is my fence line," Ethan said. "Used to be," the man said. "A beat." "Pardon," Ethan said. "Aldridge purchased the grazing rights to this section last week, filed with the county." The man reached into his vest and produced a folded paper. "Legal, signed." Ethan did not take the paper. He looked at the man. "Preston Aldridge bought grazing rights to land he doesn't own," Ethan said. "He bought the rights that were available," the man said. "Talk to the county clerk if you've got a complaint." "I will," Ethan said. "In the meantime, you're going to leave that fence line as you found it." "That fence line is going to obstruct Mr. Aldridge's—" "Leave it," Ethan said. The flatness in his voice had reached a particular level that Clara had not heard before, and it had an effect on the 3 men. Not because it was loud, because it wasn't. Because the absence of heat in it was its own kind of heat. The foreman looked at him. Did his own calculating. "We'll be back," he said. "With paperwork you can't argue with." "Then come back with paperwork," Ethan said. "Come back with anything else and we'll have a different conversation." The 3 men left. Clara waited until they were out of earshot. "This is about me," she said. Ethan was looking at the fence line. "Ethan." He turned. "Aldridge is doing this because I'm here," she said. "He's going after your land because he can't get to me directly, and he knows this land is what you—" She stopped. The weight of it was settling on her chest, specific and heavy. "I brought this to you. I brought his anger here." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't bring anything," he said. "Aldridge is doing this because it's the kind of thing Aldridge does. He's been pushing at small operations in this county for 3 years. My place was going to be on his list eventually." He paused. "You didn't change his nature. You just changed his timeline." She searched his face for the thing she had always been looking for. The resentment, the cost accounting, the moment when the person who said they didn't mind you being there started to calculate what you were actually costing them. She did not find it. "I'm not leaving," she said. "If that's what you're wondering." Something moved through his expression, something quick and complicated that she almost missed. "I wasn't wondering that," he said. "Good," she said. She turned back to the fence and inspected the cut wire with her hands and tried to understand why her heart was beating the way it was, harder than the situation required, faster than she could fully account for. She was not leaving. And something in the way he had said, "I wasn't wondering," that the certainty of it, the simplicity of it, had settled into her chest and was sitting there now, warm and steadying like a hand placed over a wound to stop the bleeding. She did not say anything more about it. But she felt it every minute of the long ride back to the cabin, and she was still feeling it when the mountain dark came down, and she lay in the narrow bed with the unlocked door, and the sounds of the ridge all around her, and understood with a clarity that was both terrifying and entirely certain that she had not felt this way about a place or a person in the whole of her 26 years of living. She pressed her hand flat against the wall and felt the solidity of it. The logs fitted close. The chinking neat. Built to last. She closed her eyes. Outside, the summer night held the ridge in its long, warm hands, and somewhere below, in Cutter's Creek, Preston Aldridge was planning his next move, and she knew, with the particular animal certainty of someone who has survived long enough to read the shape of trouble before it arrives, that it was not over. But she was still here, on her own terms. That was the thing that mattered. That was the thing she held on to in the dark, tight as a fence post, steady as the cabin walls around her, real as the name she had finally, in this strange and unpredicted summer, started to reclaim. Her own name. Clara Bennett. And she was not going anywhere. The paper arrived on a Thursday. Clara was in the kitchen garden when she heard the horse, and she stood up from her weeding with dirt on both hands, and watched a man she did not recognize ride into the yard. He was not one of Aldridge's foremen. He was dressed too carefully for that black coat, clean collar. The particular self-importance of a man who carried documents for a living, and had decided that made him significant. Ethan came out of the barn. The man dismounted and produced an envelope from his coat, with the practiced gesture of someone who had done this many times and had learned to make it feel like a verdict being delivered. "Mr. Ethan Walker," he said. "That's right," Ethan said. "I represent the interests of Mr. Preston Aldridge and the Aldridge Land and Cattle Company." He held out the envelope. "You've been served." Ethan took the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He looked at it the way he looked at everything he didn't yet understand, steadily, without rushing, as if patience were a form of intelligence. "What's the claim?" he said. "Mr. Aldridge is filing for adverse possession of the north pasture and the water rights attached to the creek feeding it. He contends that the original land grant for your property contains an error in the boundary survey from 1871 that, when corrected, places approximately 60 acres of what you currently farm within his legal holdings." The man paused. "You have 30 days to respond through the county court." Clara had crossed the yard. She was standing close enough to hear all of it. Ethan opened the envelope. He read it, all of it, carefully, his expression giving nothing away. Then he folded it back and looked at the man. "Where was this filed?" he said. "County clerk's office in Harlow, last Tuesday." "And the judge assigned Judge Raymond Coles." Something changed in Ethan's face. Something small and specific that Clara caught because she had been learning to read him, a tightening, a recognition. Not of the name, she thought, but of what the name meant. "All right," Ethan said. He handed the envelope to Clara. "Thank you for making the ride." The man blinked. He had, Clara thought, expected something more from this. Anger, maybe. Confusion. He remounted without further ceremony and rode back down the mountain road. Clara looked at the papers in her hands. She was reading well enough now to make out the formal language, the claim numbers, the boundary descriptions, the legal weight of words that had been chosen specifically to be immovable. "Raymond Coles," she said. "Preston's cousin," Ethan said. 2 years on the bench in Harlow. Good friend of Roland Haskell. She looked at him. "They planned this," she said. "They planned this," he said. "This isn't about the land. Or it is about the land, but that's not where it started." He took the papers back from her. "If they take the north pasture and the creek rights, this operation can't sustain itself through the winter. That's the point. They're trying to force you out," Clara said. "Because of me." He looked at her, and she could see him considering whether to soften that truth, and deciding in the way he always decided, that honesty was more useful than comfort. "They're trying to force us both out," he said. "And if I leave, you have nowhere to go." The clarity of it was cold and precise, like creek water in early morning. She held it in her mind and turned it and looked at all its sides. "Then we don't leave," she said. "It's not that simple." "I know it's not simple," she said. "I said we don't leave. I didn't say it would be simple." He looked at her for a moment. That look, she was learning, the one that was measuring something, not her worth, but her substance, what she was made of. "I need to ride to Harlow," he said. "Talk to a lawyer." "When?" "Tomorrow." "I'm coming with you," she said. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't tell me to stay here. This started because of me, and I am not going to sit on this ridge while you go fight it alone." A long pause. "All right," he said. Harlow was a larger town than Cutter's Creek, a county seat with a proper courthouse and 2 lawyers, and a hotel that had indoor plumbing, which Clara had heard about but never seen. They rode in early the next morning, and the difference in scale made her feel for the first moment since she had left home like a woman from a very small world. Ethan seemed to know where he was going. He led her to a building on the eastern side of the main street, a modest office with a sign above the door that read, "Thomas Birch, Attorney at Law." Thomas Birch was not what Clara expected from the name. He was a short man, perhaps 60, with the quick dark eyes of someone who spent his life looking for the specific thing in a large amount of language. He greeted Ethan with the easy recognition of prior acquaintance, and looked at Clara with the straightforward assessment of a man who needed to know who was in the room. "This is Clara Bennett," Ethan said. "She's living on my property. The Aldridge claim involves her directly." Birch looked at her. "In what way?" "Preston Aldridge had a financial arrangement with my stepfather that involved me," Clara said. "I left before the arrangement was completed. Mr. Aldridge has been attempting to recover what he considers his investment since." Birch absorbed this. "And you believe the land claim is connected?" "I believe the land claim is the land claim," Clara said. "And I also believe the timing is not a coincidence." Birch looked at Ethan. "She always talked like that." "More and more," Ethan said. Birch almost smiled. He spread the papers on his desk and bent over them with a pen and began making marks. It took an hour. At the end of the hour, Birch sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "The boundary claim has some technical merit," he said. "The original survey from 1871 does have irregularities. Nothing that would have mattered to anyone in normal circumstances, because nobody disputes the neighbors, and the land has been continuously occupied and improved by Walker for 7 years." He paused. "But Coles will find a way to make the irregularities matter, because Coles is Aldridge's man and has been for a decade. Getting a fair hearing in his court is going to be difficult." "Can we move it to a different court?" Clara asked. Birch looked at her. "On what grounds?" "Conflict of interest," she said. "If the judge is related to the plaintiff." "Coles and Aldridge are cousins by marriage," Birch said. "Technically, that's outside the standard conflict definition. A good lawyer could argue it, but a good lawyer arguing it in front of Coles isn't going to get far." "What about above Coles?" Clara said. "What's above the county court?" Birch studied her. "The territorial circuit court, federal jurisdiction. Is there a way to get this in front of the circuit court directly? If you can demonstrate that the county court process is compromised, yes, potentially." Birch looked at Ethan. "Where did you find her?" "Cutter's Creek," Ethan said. "Remarkable," Birch said without elaborating. They were outside Birch's office, horses tied at the post, when Clara said what she had been holding back for the better part of an hour. "He didn't tell us everything." Ethan looked at her. "Birch. He knows something about this claim that he didn't say. The way he looked at the ceiling when he talked about the survey." She shook her head. "He was deciding how much to tell us." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You noticed that," he said. "I notice things," she said. "I've had to." He turned and looked back at Birch's office. Then he made a decision. He went back up the steps and knocked and walked in without waiting. Clara followed him. Clara followed him. Birch looked up from his desk. "The survey," Ethan said. "What do you know about it that you didn't say?" A pause. Birch set his pen down. "I know who conducted it," he said. "In 1871, a man named Garrison Cross. He's been in Aldridge's employ for 12 years. He looked between them. The survey was not an honest mistake. The boundary error was put there deliberately at some point. I don't have proof of that. But I've seen Garrison Cross's work before, and I know the difference between a man who makes mistakes and a man who makes specific mistakes in specific places." Clara felt the cold clarity again. "They manufactured the claim," she said. "I believe so," Birch said. But belief and evidence are not the same thing. Then we find the evidence, Clara said. Birch looked at her. Miss Bennett, the original survey documents are held at the county clerk's office in Harlow. The county clerk is a man named Darby. He works with Coles, getting access to those documents to examine them. I understand that, Clara said. Where was the survey originally filed before it came to Harlow? Birch blinked. The Territorial Land Office in Denver. Would the Territorial Land Office have a copy? Silence. Yes, Birch said slowly. They would. And the Territorial Land Office is federal jurisdiction, Clara said. Birch looked at her for a very long time. Then he looked at Ethan. Then he looked back at Clara. It would take someone to ride to Denver, he said. How long? Ethan said. 4 days each way if the weather holds. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. I'll go, Ethan said. We'll go, Clara said. They did not go immediately. They could not. There was stock to arrange for the Kessler Ranch agreeable to sending a hand up to check the animals every other day, and Ethan had to do the particular arithmetic of a man who had built his life carefully and was now rearranging it under pressure. Clara watched him do it without complaint and without self-pity, and she felt watching him something that had been building in her for weeks reach a kind of pressure she could no longer comfortably ignore. She did not say anything about it. What she said was this the evening before they were to leave, sitting at the table with the book between them, but neither of them reading. When this is over, however it ends, I want you to know that I'm not leaving because of circumstances. Whatever I decide about where I am and where I go, it won't be because I was pushed. Ethan was quiet. I don't know where I'm going to be in 6 months, she said. I don't know what my life is going to look like, but I'm making choices. That's different from what I was doing before. I know, he said. I wanted to say it out loud, she said. To you. So you'd know I know the difference. He looked at the table. He turned his coffee mug in that slow circle she had learned to recognize the gesture that meant he was deciding whether to say the thing he was actually thinking. I'd like you to stay, he said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but that's for you to decide, not me. The directness of it hit her harder than she had expected. She had been bracing for something more hedged, something that would give him an exit, that would let them both pretend this had not been said. He had not given them that. I know, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud, he said. To you. She looked at him across the table. He was looking at her with that careful, steady gaze that she had come to think of as the truest version of who he was. No performance in it, no angle, just a man looking at a woman and meaning what he said. She did not say anything else. She picked up the book and found her page and began to read, and he picked up his own book and read, and the fire settled in the hearth, and outside the summer night pressed warm against the cabin walls, and Clara Bennett sat in a home that felt more like a home than any place she had ever lived, and held the word "stay" somewhere in the center of her chest, like a match just struck, careful with the flame. Denver was large and loud and bewildering in the way of cities that have decided to become something in a hurry. Clara had never been anywhere near its size, and she felt it, the press of people, the density of sound, the way the streets were full of the kind of purposeful movement that assumed everyone already knew where they were going. She stayed close to Ethan, not because she was afraid, but because the navigation was his, and she was still learning the map. The Territorial Land Office was a federal building stone, serious with the particular atmosphere of a place where paper had power. The clerk who received them was a young man with spectacles, who looked at them with the mild suspicion of someone accustomed to people arriving with problems. Ethan explained what they needed. The clerk disappeared into the back. He was gone for a very long time. When he came back, he was carrying a file. The Walker Land Survey, 1871, he said. He laid it on the counter. You're welcome to review it here. I can't let the documents leave the building. Clara looked at Ethan. He nodded once. She opened the file. She was not a lawyer. She was a woman who had learned to read 3 months ago across a table in a mountain cabin with a worn red book and a man who did not quit on her. She knew that. She had no illusions about the limits of what she understood. But she was also a woman who for her entire life had survived by looking at things carefully and finding the place where they did not add up. She went through the documents page by page. Ethan stood beside her. The clerk sat at his desk and pretended not to watch. It took nearly 2 hours. She found it on page 11. It was a notation in the margin, small in a different ink from the rest of the document in handwriting that did not match the surveyor's hand on the other pages. A boundary correction apparently made after the original filing. An addition. "This wasn't in the original," she said quietly. Ethan leaned in. "How can you tell?" he said. "The ink is different. Look at the color. The rest of the document is the same shade throughout. This is darker. And this handwriting," she pointed. "The surveyor signs his name on every page. Look at the letter G in Garrison. Now look at the G in this notation." Ethan looked. "They're not the same person," he said. "They're not the same person," she said. She looked up at the clerk. "I need a copy of this document," she said. "Official. Stamped with the land office seal." The clerk blinked. "Ma'am, that's a formal request that requires—" "I know it requires paperwork," she said. "I'll fill out whatever paperwork you need. But I need this document officially copied and sealed today. The original will stay here with you. I need the copy." The clerk looked at her. He looked at the document. He looked at Ethan. "Is she always like this?" he said. "Getting more so," Ethan said. They had the copy by late afternoon. They ate at a counter in a small establishment near the land office, and Clara did not speak much because she was turning the implications over the way she turned soil, methodically looking for what was underneath. "This isn't enough," she said finally. Ethan looked at her. "The notation proves the document was altered," she said. "But it doesn't prove Aldridge ordered it, and without that connection, we can challenge the survey, but we can't touch him directly." She paused. "He'll just produce Garrison Cross, and Cross will say the correction was legitimate." "So we need Cross," Ethan said. "Or someone who knows what Cross did and why," she said. She thought. "Aldridge has been doing this to other properties. Birch said so. 3 years. Other small operations." She looked at Ethan. "We're not the first people he's done this to." The recognition that moved through Ethan's face was slow and arrived complete. "The others might still have their papers," he said. "If they were pushed out fast enough," Clara said. "They might not have known what hit them. But if even one of them kept their documents, if even one of them can show the same pattern." "That's a federal fraud case," Ethan said. "That's a federal fraud case," she said. He looked at her across the table in the noisy Denver eating establishment, with the copy of the tampered survey between them. And she saw something in his expression that she had not seen directed at her before. Not admiration exactly. Something deeper. Something that looked from the outside like what it felt like to realize a person was more than you'd expected, and to find yourself genuinely glad about it. She looked back down at the papers. "We need to find the others," she said. They were 2 days' ride from Harlow, pushing back toward the county seat, with names Birch had given them 3 other small ranching operations in the Northern Valley that had sold or abandoned in the past 3 years, under pressure from Aldridge when the rider caught up with them. He came from behind fast, and Clara felt Ethan tense before she even turned to look. Her hand went automatically to her saddle, a gesture she would not have made 4 months ago. A reflex she had acquired somewhere in the weeks of learning what her own instincts were for. The rider pulled up beside them. He was one of the Kessler hands. She recognized him, a man named Hollis Young, with the look of someone who had been riding hard and was not happy about what he was carrying. "Walker," he said, catching his breath. "I've been riding since yesterday morning to find you." "What happened?" Ethan said. "Men came up to your place 2 days ago," Hollis said. 3 of them. I wasn't there. I came to check on the animals like I said, and they were already gone. But they went through the cabin." Clara's stomach dropped. "The animals?" Ethan said. "Fine. Horses and goats, all fine. But the cabin?" Hollis shook his head. "They went through it, took some things, left the rest a mess." Clara thought of the 17 books. She thought of the red-covered one worn soft at the corners. She thought of the photograph between the last 2 books on the shelf, a man and a woman, and the woman smiling sideways at something just off frame. "The photograph," she said before she could stop herself. Hollis looked at her. "Ma'am, on the bookshelf, between the last two books." He shook his head slowly. "I don't know specifically what they took, ma'am. I'm sorry." Ethan was very still beside her. She looked at him. His hands were loose on the reins, but the rest of him was not loose. He had gone to that particular stillness that she had learned to read as something working very hard not to become something else. "Ethan," she said. He turned and looked at her, and what she saw in his face made her chest ache in a way she had not been prepared for. Not anger, not quite, but something underneath anger, something more permanent and harder to recover from. "They went into my home," he said, quietly, factually. "Yes," she said. He looked at the road ahead. "Then we go home," he said, "and we finish this." What they found when they returned was worse than Hollis had described, and Hollis had not sugarcoated it. The cabin had been gone through with the particular thoroughness of people who wanted to leave a message along with the mess. Drawers pulled out, shelves emptied, the table overturned. Flour from the larder spread across the kitchen floor. Clara stood in the middle of it and breathed. Ethan stood behind her in the doorway for a moment. Then he walked in and picked up the overturned table and set it on its legs and said without any particular inflection, "I'll check the barn." He was giving her the room to have the moment she needed without an audience. She went to the bookshelf. Most of the books were on the floor, some of them splayed open with broken spines. The red-covered one was there, face down, its pages bent, but there. She picked it up carefully, smoothed the pages. The space between the last two books on the shelf was empty. The photograph was gone. She held the red book against her chest and stood in the wrecked room and let herself feel it, the violation of it, the deliberateness of it, the message it was meant to send. They had taken the one thing in this cabin that was irreplaceable. They had known or guessed or calculated the cost of it with the particular cruelty of people who had thought carefully about what would hurt most. She was still standing there when Ethan came back from the barn. He saw immediately. He looked at the empty space on the shelf. His jaw tightened once. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "Not your fault," he said. "Ethan." "It was a photograph," he said. His voice was controlled, but she could hear what it was controlling. "Eliza wouldn't want me to—" He stopped. Started again. "She would tell me not to make it mean more than it is." "What is it?" Clara said. He looked at her. "An attempt to make me feel like I've lost something I can't get back." He paused. "I still have every memory in it." She looked at him across the wrecked room. "So do I," she said quietly. The way she was smiling, something cracked in his face. Just for a moment. Just enough for her to see through it, to what was underneath the grief that was not new, but had been freshly pressed upon the love that had not ended, just because the person was gone, the years of solitary mornings in a cabin built for two. He looked away. She crossed the room without thinking about it. She put her hand on his arm, her hand that had calluses, now that was not the hand she'd had in Cutter's Creek, and she held it there. He put his own hand over hers. They stood like that in the wrecked room for a moment. Not long. Long enough. Then he stepped back and said, "We've got work to do," and began to put things right, and she bent and picked up a book from the floor, and together they set about the business of restoring what had been damaged, which was, she was beginning to understand, what the two of them did best. 3 days later, Birch rode up from Harlow. He came alone, and his face had the expression of a man carrying two things at once, information and the weight of it. He sat at the table, righted solid clean, and spread papers of his own. "I found two of the three families," he said. "The Hartwell operation and the Gruber homestead. Both of them kept their original land documents. Both show boundary survey notations that match what you found in Denver, same ink inconsistency, same handwriting discrepancy. Garrison Cross's signature on documents with at least one entry he did not write." Clara looked at Ethan. "That's the pattern," she said. "That's the pattern," Birch confirmed. 3 properties, 3 fraudulent surveys. all benefiting Aldridge, all processed through Coles's court. He paused. I've drafted a complaint to the Territorial Circuit Court. Federal jurisdiction fraud and conspiracy, if you're willing to put your names on it. Silence. What are the risks? Ethan said. Aldridge has money and connections, Birch said. He will make this difficult. His lawyer is better than I am on paper. And Coles will do everything in his power to slow the process in his court before it gets kicked up. What are the chances? Clara said. Birch looked at her. With 3 fraudulent surveys and testimony from the Hartwells and Grubers, reasonable. Better than I'd have said a week ago. He paused. But Miss Bennett, I want to be honest with you about something else. Your name on this complaint is going to put you in the center of a public proceeding. Your family, your history with Aldridge, all of it will be visible. Clara felt the particular weight of public exposure, the thing she had been managing since she was old enough to understand that people had decided who she was before she had a chance to say so herself. She thought about her mother's voice. You are a weight around my neck. She thought about Preston Aldridge in front of the whole town, with his inventory smile. She thought about the crowd that had stood there watching and said nothing. Let them look, Clara said. Birch studied her. You're certain? I am certain, she said, that I am done making myself small so that other people are comfortable. Ethan beside her was quiet. But she felt him in the way she had learned to feel the shifts in this man who did not speak unnecessarily, but was always paying attention. She felt him settle, like a horse finding level ground. Draw up the complaint, he said. We'll both sign it. The response from Aldridge came within a week. It came not through a lawyer or a formal document, but through her mother. Margaret Haskell arrived at the foot of the Ridge Road on a Wednesday morning alone in a wagon she had driven herself, which was not something Clara had ever seen her mother do. Margaret Haskell did not drive wagons. She arranged for things to be driven. The fact of her alone on that road said something before she opened her mouth. Ethan came out of the barn. Clara came off the porch. They met her in the yard. Margaret looked at Clara the way she had always looked at her. The assessment, the inventory. But something was different. The composure was intact, the straight spine, and the correct posture. But underneath it, something had shifted. Something was working harder than usual to hold its shape. I need to speak to my daughter, Margaret said. You can speak to me, Clara said. He stays. A flicker in her mother's expression. Then a nod. Preston Aldridge is willing to drop the land claim, Margaret said. All of it. Walk away from the survey dispute and any legal action currently in progress. Clara waited. In exchange, Margaret said, you withdraw your complaint with the circuit court, and you leave Colorado. The yard went very quiet. Clara felt Ethan go still beside her. She did not look at him. He wants me gone, Clara said. I wants this finished, Margaret said. You've caused considerable. He's a fraud, Clara said. He has fraudulently seized land from 3 families that we know of. He has manufactured legal documents and corrupted a county judge and intimidated people off land they built with their own hands. She paused. And his offer is that I leave quietly, and he faces no consequences for any of it. Clara. No, Clara said. Margaret's composure thinned. Just slightly. Just enough. Do you understand what will happen if this goes to court? Margaret said. Your name will be in every paper in the territory. People will know everything about Roland, about the arrangement, about you living here with this man unmarried. People already know, Clara said. People knew the day I walked out of Cutter's Creek. They were standing there. They saw it. She held her mother's gaze. The difference is that I stopped caring what they know. Clara. Her mother's voice dropped. Something in it shifted. Something that was not the performance, not the posture, something older and more difficult to look at. I am trying to protect you. Clara looked at her mother. At the straight spine and the careful hands and the woman underneath all of it who had made choices. Bad choices. Choices that could not be unmade, and who was standing in a yard on a mountain road trying to use the word protect after 26 years of everything that word had cost. I know, Clara said. Her voice was quiet. She meant it. She did know, Or at least she knew that her mother believed it, which was its own complicated truth. "But I don't need you to protect me anymore, Mama. I need you to let me stand." Margaret looked at her, in the eyes, longer than she usually managed. Something moved through her expression that Clara had not seen there in a very long time. It did not resolve into anything clear. It did not become a decision or a change. But it was real, and Clara recognized it, and she filed it away carefully in the place where she kept things she did not yet know what to do with. Margaret looked at Ethan. "Are you going to let her do this?" "It's not mine to let," Ethan said. Margaret looked back at Clara. "Then I can't help you," she said. Her voice was steady. "When this falls apart." "It won't," Clara said. A pause. Margaret gathered herself, the posture, the composure, all of it assembled back into the shape she had worn for 30 years. She climbed back into the wagon. She took up the reins. "You have your father's stubbornness," she said. It was not quite an insult. It was not quite a compliment. It was something else, something with no name that Clara could find yet. "I know," Clara said. She watched her mother turn the wagon. She watched her drive back down the mountain road out of the yard, back toward the road to Cutter's Creek, smaller and smaller until she was gone. Ethan stood beside her. "You all right?" he said. She thought about it, really thought about it. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true, "That's the first time in my life I've said no to her and meant it." "How does it feel?" he said. She looked at the road where her mother's wagon had been. She pressed her lips together. She felt the summer heat on her face, and the mountain air in her lungs, and the calluses on her palms, and the red book she had read 100 pages of, and the memory of a locked door she had chosen not to lock, and the image of a man standing beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her in every moment that had mattered since she walked out of Cutter's Creek. "Like the first day of something," she said. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "It usually does." She turned and went back inside. There was work to do, and the complaint needed her signature, and the circuit court was waiting, and Preston Aldridge had not yet faced what was coming. None of it was over. But Clara Bennett walked back through the door of the cabin on the ridge, with her shoulders level and her chin up, and she felt for the first time in 26 years that the ground under her feet was hers. Not given, not permitted, hers. The circuit court hearing was set for the 3rd week of September. Birch sent word on a Friday, and Clara read the letter herself, all of it without help, without running her finger under each word the way she'd had to 2 months ago. She read it the way she now read most things, steadily taking it in, understanding it. She set it on the table and looked at Ethan across the breakfast dishes. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he said. Is that enough time? Birch thinks so. The Hartwells and the Grubers have agreed to testify. He's filed the surveying expert's affidavit from Denver. He looked at his coffee. It's enough evidence. Whether it's enough justice is a different question. She understood what he meant. Evidence and justice were not the same currency. She had learned that much from watching Birch work, from sitting in his office on 3 different occasions, and watching a good man navigate a system that had been partially purchased by a bad one. Evidence was what you brought. Justice was what the system decided to do with it, and the system had people in it, and people had arrangements. We go, she said. We say what's true. That's all we can do. He looked at her. When did you get so practical? I've always been practical, she said. I just used to spend most of it surviving. Now I have room to use it for something else. He almost smiled. She was getting better at catching the small movements at the corner of his mouth that he had apparently spent 7 solitary years not bothering to restrain, but had forgotten how to let out fully. She caught this one and filed it away with the others, which she had started to think of as a kind of collection. Not vanity. Just evidence of a man coming back to himself and the particular privilege of being nearby when it happened. In the 6 weeks before the hearing, Cutter's Creek tried twice more to reach them. The first time was Roland. He came with a different deputy, not the young uncertain one from before, but an older man, harder-faced, who had the look of someone who had decided in advance that he was not going to be impressed by anything he saw on this ridge. Roland's approach had changed. The softness was gone. He came directly this time without the performance of the concerned stepfather, and said what he meant. "You pull that complaint, and I'll see to it that Clara gets a fair settlement from the Aldridge arrangement," he said. He was looking at Ethan, not at Clara, which was its own statement. "Money. Enough to start somewhere new. This doesn't have to go any further." Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Clara. Roland's eyes followed his reluctantly, like a man who had hoped to avoid that particular problem. Clara met his gaze. "Talk to me," she said. "I'm the one you're bargaining with." Roland's jaw tightened. "Clara, look at me when you're making an offer that involves my life," she said. "Or don't make it at all." A pause. Roland looked at her. The assessment in his eyes was different now, not the inventory look, or not only that. There was something else in it, something that might have been the first edge of genuine uncertainty. "The offer is real," he said. "I know it is," Clara said. "And the answer is no. Not because I don't need money. I don't have any, and starting with some would be easier than starting without. But because what Aldridge did to the Hartwells and the Grubers doesn't get fixed by me taking money and walking away, and I am not going to let it go unfixed because it's convenient." She paused. "And because the next family, he does it to the next person who doesn't know what's in their survey, who doesn't have someone to ride to Denver with them, I'd know about it. And I'd have had the chance to stop it, and I didn't." Roland looked at her for a long time. "You've changed," he said. It was not a compliment. But it was not entirely not a compliment either. "Yes," she said. "I have." He left. The second attempt came not as a visit, but as a letter addressed to Clara in handwriting. She recognized as her mother's. She held it for a full day before she opened it, sitting with the fact of it on the table between her and her morning coffee, feeling the weight of it without reading it. When she finally opened it, it was shorter than she expected. Her mother had written, "I have spoken to Roland about the Aldridge matter. I told him, I believe you are right about what he did. I will not testify. I cannot. But I wanted you to know that I said it. Nothing else. No apology, no reversal, no sudden transformation into the mother Clara had needed for 26 years. But the words, 'I believe you are right,' sat on the page, and Clara read them 3 times, and then she folded the letter carefully and put it in the pocket of her apron and went out to the garden and weeded for an hour in the late August heat. And she did not cry, but her hands were not entirely steady in the soil. She did not show Ethan the letter. It was hers. It belonged to the complicated and unresolved truth of her mother, which was not something that was going to resolve cleanly, and which she was learning to hold without needing it to be simpler than it was. That evening at supper she said, "My mother's not going to testify, but she's not going to interfere either." Ethan looked at her. "You heard from her?" "Today." He waited to see if she wanted to say more. When she didn't, he nodded once and passed the bread, and the evening moved on, and she was grateful again for a man who understood the difference between caring about something and pushing on it. The hearing in Harlow lasted 2 days. Clara had never been inside a courtroom before. The formality of it struck her the particular theater of justice, the way everything was arranged to make certain proceedings feel inevitable. The circuit judge, a man named Aldous Crane from Santa Fe, had a face like weathered granite, and eyes that moved over everything with the same level attention, not giving any indication of what they found there. Aldridge was there with his lawyer, a man named Forsyth, who was, as Birch had predicted, considerably more polished than Birch himself. Garrison Cross was there. Roland Haskell was in the gallery. The deputy. Several men Clara did not recognize, but who had the look of Aldridge's people. The Hartwells were there. A man and woman in their 50s, holding hands in the gallery, with the particular grip of people who had lost something they'd built, and had not entirely stopped feeling the loss. Clara looked at them, and felt the case in her chest become something more than legal, become actual, become the weight of actual people, actual years, actual work that had been taken. The Grubers were there too. An older man alone whose wife had died the winter after they lost their land. Clara sat beside Ethan at Birch's table and kept her hands flat on her knees and listened to everything. Forsyth was good. She had to give him that. He worked on the boundary survey with the patience of someone who had done this before, presenting technical arguments in language designed to confuse, repeating Garrison Cross's account of the survey correction until it began to take on the dull weight of repetition, which was its own kind of persuasion. Cross himself testified with the confidence of a man who had told his story enough times to believe it. When Birch cross-examined him, he was thorough. The ink discrepancy, the handwriting comparison, the expert affidavit from Denver. Cross had an answer for all of it, answers that were smooth and prepared, and that Forsyth had clearly coached him on. Clara watched Judge Crane's face. She could not read it. That was the most frightening thing about the hearing, that she could not read the face of the man who was going to decide. At the end of the first day, walking out of the courthouse into the September air, she said to Birch, "How do you think it's going?" Birch looked at her. He was a man who had practiced not giving false comfort, and he did not give it now. "Honestly, Cross is holding up better than I hoped. The technical arguments are landing for Forsyth, but the pattern—" He paused. "The three properties, the same notations, the same handwriting discrepancy across three different surveys. That's hard to explain away. Judge Crane is not a fool." "Is he an honest man?" Clara said. Birch was quiet for a moment. "I believe so. I've appeared before him twice. I believe he is." She nodded. It was the best she was going to get. That night, she lay awake in the hotel, a narrow room, nothing like the cabin, the sounds of the town wrong and close after months of mountain quiet, and she thought about honesty, about what it was worth and what it cost. She had spent 6 months surrounded by dishonesty. Rowland's accounts, Aldridge's surveys, the crowd that had watched and said nothing, and she had come to understand that dishonesty was not simply the absence of truth, but an active thing, a force that required energy to maintain, that expanded into every space that honest people left empty. She had stopped leaving spaces empty. She was not sure exactly when that had happened. Somewhere in the months of weeding and goat milk and read books and evening conversations at a table in a cabin on a ridge. Somewhere between the woman who had been told she had no value and the woman who had ridden to Denver and found a falsified document and understood what it meant. She turned onto her side and listened to the town and waited for morning. On the second day, Judge Crane asked to see the original Denver documents directly. This was not something that had been planned. Birch sat up slightly when Crane said it, and Clara saw the reaction and felt her own pulse change. Forsyth objected. Crane overruled him without apparent effort. The documents came. Crane examined them himself slowly, with the same level attention he brought to everything, and then he looked at Cross. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I'd like you to sign your name for me, on this paper." Cross blinked. "I beg your pardon. Your signature," Crane said. "Here, on this blank page." A long pause. Forsyth leaned toward Cross and said something low. "I'm not asking Mr. Forsyth," Crane said. "I'm asking the witness." Cross signed. Crane looked at the signature, then at the document, then at the marginalia notation that Clara had found on page 11. He set both papers down side by side on his bench. "The G in your signature," he said, "is not the same as the G in this notation, not even close." He looked at Cross. "Would you like to revise any part of your testimony?" The silence in the courtroom was the kind that happens when everyone in the room has understood something at the same moment. Cross said nothing. Forsyth was on his feet. Crane looked at him. "Sit down, Mr. Forsyth." Forsyth sat down. Crane looked at Aldridge, who had been sitting through the 2 days with the careful stillness of a man who had absolute confidence in his arrangements. That stillness was no longer quite as absolute. "Mr. Aldridge," Crane said, "I'm going to recess for 1 hour. When I return, I am going to ask you directly whether you directed the alteration of survey documents submitted to the Territorial Land Office. I would strongly recommend that you use that hour to speak candidly with your attorney about your options." He rose. The room rose with him. Clara reached under the table and found Ethan's hand. She had not planned to do that either. Her hand found his, the way her hand found tools now, with the sureness of something that had become habit, that had come to feel like the correct object in the correct place. He held it. Once firm, then let go because the room was full of people and neither of them were the kind to make a display. But she felt it for the rest of the recess, sitting outside on the courthouse steps in the September sun, watching the town of Harlow move around them as though nothing consequential were happening 60 feet away. The recess lasted not 1 hour, but 3. Birch came out after the first hour with the look of a man who was carefully not showing what he knew. "Aldridge's lawyer is in with Crane," he said. "I don't know what's being offered." "A deal," Ethan said. "Possibly. Crane has the discretion to accept a settlement that addresses the full scope of the fraud, all 3 properties, rather than run a case that could take months." He looked at Clara. "If that's what he's arranging, it might be the better outcome. Faster. More certain." "Would Aldridge face consequences?" Clara said. "If Crane's extracting a settlement, he'll want teeth in it," Birch said. "Fines. Restitution to all 3 families. Possibly license revocation for Cross, depending on what Forsyth has offered to give up." He paused. "But it would not be a criminal conviction." Clara looked at the courthouse door. "The Hartwells," she said, "and Mr. Gruber. They need to be part of whatever conversation is happening in there." Birch looked at her. "They're not parties in a position to—" "They lost their land," she said. "They came here and told the truth in front of a courtroom. If there is a settlement being negotiated, they deserve to know what's being settled on their behalf." She stood up. "Can you go back in and say that any resolution needs to have the families present?" Birch looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. "She's right," Ethan said simply. Birch went back in. Clara sat down on the steps and looked at the street and breathed. Ethan sat beside her. "You doing all right?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me when it's over." "Fair enough," he said. They sat in the September sun on the courthouse steps and waited. And Clara thought about the Hartwells holding hands in the gallery, and about the older Gruber man sitting alone, and about all the things that got taken from people who did not know they had the right to fight back. She thought about what she had known 3 months ago and what she knew now, about the difference between the two. She thought about a red-covered book and 17 pages she had now read past. She thought about the word stay. The resolution that came out of those 3 hours was not perfect. Nothing real ever was. Aldridge did not go to jail. That was the hard truth of it, and Clara held it honestly, without pretending it was not a loss. His lawyer had negotiated, and Crane had accepted a settlement that included full restitution to the Hartwell and Gruber families' land, returned where possible financial compensation, where not. Cross lost his surveyor's license and faced a criminal fraud charge, separately smaller but real. Aldridge's land and cattle company was fined substantially and placed under federal oversight for 3 years, and the Walker property, every acre, the north pasture, the creek rights, all of it was confirmed, cleared and documented in federal record as belonging entirely and without dispute to Ethan Walker. Birch delivered this to them in the courthouse hallway, reading from the settlement document with the same brisk efficiency he brought to everything, and when he finished, he looked up at them both and said, "It's not everything." "It's enough," Ethan said. "Is it?" Birch looked at Clara. She thought about it, genuinely. She turned it over and looked at all its sides the way she'd learned to do. "Aldridge still has his money," she said. "He'll be careful for a while, and then he'll find another way to use it. That's the truth." She paused. "But the Hartwells are going back to their land. Mr. Gruber has money to start again. And Cross, the man who put false lines on paper so that people who worked their whole lives would lose what they'd built. He's facing a charge that follows him." She looked at the settlement document. "The next person Aldridge looks at will have a federal record to point to. That matters." Birch looked at her for a moment. "You know you'd make a good lawyer." "I'm still working on reading," she said. "One thing at a time." They rode home in the late afternoon, the September light going golden across the valley, the mountains ahead of them, solid and permanent as they had always been. Clara rode Juno. She had been on her own horse for the trip, a fact that she still found quietly remarkable, that she could note and then move past without ceremony, the way you moved past things that had become simply true. They did not talk much on the ride. There was a comfortable quality to the silence between them now, not the cautious quiet of the first weeks when she had measured every silence for what it might contain, but something more settled. Something that did not need to be filled. They were an hour from the cabin when Ethan said, "What do you want to do?" She looked at him. "With now," he said. "With what comes next. You've been so focused on the case. Now it's done. What do you want?" It was she recognized the same question he had asked her that day in Cutter's Creek, when he had stopped his horse and looked at her and offered not rescue, but choice. She had answered it then, without knowing the full weight of what she was choosing. She had known only that she wanted to leave. Now she knew more than that. "I want to stay on the ridge," she said. He looked at the road ahead. His hands were easy on the reins. "As what?" he said quietly. Not pushing, not angling, just asking the thing that was there to be asked. She had been thinking about this for weeks. Not with the anxiety of someone trying to figure out the safe answer, but with the particular deliberateness she had started to apply to things that mattered. "I want to open a school," she said. "There are children on this mountain and in the valley who can't read. I know what that costs. I've paid that cost myself." She paused. "I want to change that, even if it's small, even if it's just a few children in a cabin." She looked at him. "And I want to be here. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I want to be." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "The cabin's big enough, he said, "for a classroom, in the mornings." She looked at him. "The table's solid," he said. "Plenty of room for books." "I don't have books," she said. "We can get books," he said. She watched his profile, the set of his jaw, the particular stillness. The man who had been alone for 7 years on a ridge and had somehow become over a summer the person she trusted most in the world. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not Eliza," she said. She said it gently because it was important, because she needed it to be clear. "I can't be what she was to you. I wouldn't want to try. She was her own person, and she sounds like she was remarkable, and she deserves to be remembered as herself." Something moved through his face. "I know that," he said. "I need you to know that I know that too," she said. "That I'm not asking to fill a space. I'm asking if there's room for something new, something that's not a replacement, but is its own thing." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she wondered. Then he said, "There's room." 2 words. Simple, plain, complete. The way he said everything that was real. She looked at the road ahead. "All right then," she said, and something settled between them. Not a declaration, not a ceremony. Nothing that required witnesses or paper. Just 2 people on horses on a mountain road in September, agreeing to something that was true. October came in cold and clear, and with it came the first unexpected thing, the Hartwell boy. His name was Daniel. He was 11 years old, and he arrived at the cabin on a Tuesday morning on foot 3 miles down from the Hartwell property that had been returned to his family by the settlement. He knocked on the door with the uncertain knock of a child who has been sent somewhere by adults and is not entirely sure of his reception. Clara opened the door. "Ma'am," he said. "My mother said you might. She said you were going to—" He stopped, tried again. "I can't read," he said. "Ma'am. And my mother said maybe." "Come in," Clara said. "Have you eaten?" He had not. She fed him, which was apparently the right order of operations, because by the time he had eaten, he was less stiff-shouldered and more willing to make eye contact. She sat him at the table with the red-covered book and asked him to tell her what he saw on the first page. "Shapes," he said. "That's right," she said. "They're shapes, and I'm going to show you what they mean." Ethan appeared in the doorway from outside, took in the scene, and disappeared again without comment. She heard him a few minutes later begin the unhurried sounds of his morning work. Making room the way he always made room, not by stepping back, but by being steady. Daniel Hartwell came back on Thursday, and the Thursday after that. By November he had brought his younger sister. By December there were 6 children at the table on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. By January there were 9. Clara had not announced a school. She had not put up a notice in Harlow or sent word to the valley. The school had simply happened the way things happen when a need is real and a person who can meet it is present. Word moved the way word moved in a sparse country, person to person, slowly and permanently, carried by the people who needed it. Ethan built a longer table in November. He said nothing about it, just appeared one Saturday with lumber and spent the afternoon. And by evening the table was 8 feet long, and Clara ran her hand along its surface and did not say anything either, because some things did not need to be said. She bought more books from Harlow. Birch, who turned out to have opinions about education that he had never had the occasion to express before, sent 3 by post with a note that said simply, "For the school." "The man has good taste in children's books," she told Ethan. He said he was not surprised. The letter from Margaret Haskell came in February, in the deep heart of winter, when the mountain road was hard and the world was very quiet. Clara read it at the table with the morning light coming in gray and cold through the window, and she read it twice to make sure she had understood it. Her mother wrote, "Roland is selling the store. He has debts that I was not informed of, and the store is being sold to cover them. I will be going to stay with my sister in Kansas. I wanted you to know. I also wanted to say, I have thought many times about the afternoon in August when you said you needed me to let you stand. I did not understand then what you meant. I think I understand it better now. I am sorry it took me this long." Clara folded the letter. She sat with it for a while. Then she went to the small writing desk she had set up in the corner. The desk that had not been there in the summer, that Ethan had built in September, without being asked, that she used for correspondence, and for the notes she kept on each child's progress, and she wrote back to her mother. She wrote, "I received your letter. I am glad you are going somewhere safe. Kansas is not so far that letters won't reach. If you want to write, I will write back. I am not able to give you what I don't have yet, but I am not closing the door." She sealed it and gave it to Ethan to take to Harlow, and she did not tell him what was in it, and he did not ask. She was learning that forgiveness was not a single moment, but a process, slow, as learning to read one word at a time, one recognition at a time, built over many sittings at the same table, returning again and again to the thing you had avoided until avoidance became harder than engagement. She was not there yet. She might not get there entirely, but she had written back. That was enough for February. The twist that broke February open came not from outside, but from within the cabin on a Wednesday night after the children were gone and supper was over, and she and Ethan were at the table in the familiar evening quiet. Ethan put something on the table between them. She looked at it. It was the photograph. She looked up at him. "How?" she said. "Hollis," he said. He went back to the men who came through the cabin, tracked them down. 2 of them were Kessler hands, who'd taken a bad deal from Aldridge. They'd been told to take anything that looked personal to rattle us. Hollis knew them. He asked for it back. Ethan paused. "He said to tell you he was sorry it took so long." Clara looked at the photograph. The man and the woman. Ethan younger, the open thing in his face. Eliza smiling sideways at something off frame. She picked it up carefully. "It belongs on the shelf," she said. "Yes," he said. She got up and went to the shelf and put it back between the last 2 books in its place. She stood there for a moment with her back to the room, her hand still touching the edge of the photograph. "She's part of what this place is," Clara said. "I don't want you to ever put it away because I'm here." "I know," Ethan said. "I won't." She turned around. Howe was looking at her across the room with that expression, the one she had learned, the one that was not performed, the one that reached the surface only when he was not managing it, and she held his gaze, and something passed between them that was not new, not sudden, but was perhaps the first time they had both allowed themselves to look at it directly, without looking away. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. He stood up from the table. He came across the room, not fast, not dramatic. Ethan Walker did not do fast and dramatic, and he stood in front of her and looked at her the way he had looked at her from the first, steady, serious, meaning what he said. "Will you marry me?" he said. No speech, no kneel, no prepared words. Just the question, plain and direct as everything he had ever said to her. Clara looked at him. She thought about a woman standing in a dusty street being told she had no value. She thought about a locked door she had chosen not to lock. She thought about 17 books and a red-covered one she had read to the end. She thought about 9 children at a table learning the shapes that meant things. She thought about 2 words. There's room set on a mountain road in September. She thought about the difference between being claimed and being chosen. Yes, she said. He put his hand on her face, one hand at her jaw, the way you hold something you are careful with, and she leaned into it, and outside the February wind moved through the pines on the ridge, and the fire settled in the hearth, and the photograph sat in its place on the shelf, and the 8-foot table stood solid in the center of the room. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. "We should tell Birch," she said after a moment. "He'll be insufferable about it," Ethan said. "He sent 3 books for the school," she said. "He deserves to be insufferable about one thing." He almost laughed. That full laugh she had been collecting piece by piece all these months. This one came closer than most. She pulled back and looked at him, and she thought, I am a woman who was sold in a street for $40 and a canceled debt. And I am standing in a home I helped to build in a life I chose with my own hands, next to a man who asked me what I wanted before he asked me for anything. The mountain outside was dark and cold. In here there was light, and tomorrow there would be children at the table, and letters to answer, and goats to milk, and all the ordinary sacred business of a life that was finally, unreservedly, completely hers. Birch was in fact insufferable about it. He arrived at the cabin on the first Saturday of March with a bottle of good whiskey and a copy of the Colorado territorial marriage law that he had apparently brought because he wanted to make certain everything was done correctly, which Clara found both entirely predictable and genuinely touching. He sat at the 8-foot table and went through the requirements with the same brisk efficiency he brought to legal documents, and when he finished, he looked up at both of them and said, "You'll need a witness. I'm available." "We noticed," Ethan said. "I also," Birch said, producing a second document from his coat, took the liberty of filing a formal record of the Walker property boundaries with the Territorial Land Office in Denver. Permanent record. Federal Register. Nobody touches that land again without going through a process that will take longer than Preston Aldridge has patience for. He set it on the table. "Consider it a wedding gift." Clara looked at the document, then at Birch. "You did that before we told you we were getting married," she said. Birch had the grace to look slightly caught. "I had reasonable expectations," he said. She laughed. It came out full and real, the kind of laugh she had not had much practice with before this mountain, and it surprised her every time, the ease of it, the way it came up without permission. Ethan looked at her when she laughed, and she had learned to recognize that look too. The way his whole face shifted slightly when she made that sound, as if something in him always turned toward it, the way a plant turned toward light. They were married on the second Saturday of March in the cabin with Birch as witness, and Daniel Hartwell's mother as the second, because she had asked to be included, and Clara had said yes without hesitation. The ceremony was short. The justice of the peace from Harlow said the required words, and Ethan and Clara said the required words back, and Birch signed the document with a flourish that Clara suspected he had been practicing, and that was that. Afterward, Mrs. Hartwell cried. She apologized for crying. Clara told her not to apologize for the most honest reaction in the room. Ethan put his hand at the small of Clara's back as they stood on the porch watching Birch and Mrs. Hartwell ride down the mountain road. It was a simple gesture, the kind that people who belong to each other make without thinking. Clara had watched other people make that gesture her whole life and had not understood until now what it felt like from the inside. Not possession, not performance. Just the plain physical language of two people who had decided to stand together and were saying so with their bodies. She leaned into it barely. He stayed steady. The mountain held them both. "Birch is going to tell everyone in Harlow before he reaches the bottom of the road," she said. "Already decided on it before he left the table," Ethan said. "Good," she said. "Let him." Spring came to the ridge, the way spring always came, not all at once, but in installments. The cold retreating by degrees, the earth returning to itself, one stubborn inch at a time. Clara had seen springs before, but she had never watched one from a place she had a stake in, had never felt the season's return as something personal, as evidence that the world she was responsible for was continuing. The school had grown to 11 children. By March and by April, she had a waiting list, a concept she had not anticipated needing, and which delighted her in a way that was difficult to explain, without sounding like a woman who had expected very little and was still surprised by more. She kept the school in the mornings. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and now Saturdays, with the longer table full and the books 23. Now Birch, having apparently unlimited opinions about curriculum, arranged along the newly added shelf that Ethan had built without being asked the way he built everything she needed before she thought to request it. The children were the part that undid her regularly and without warning. Not in a way that She was not a woman easily overwhelmed anymore, but in the particular way of things that exceeded their own significance. Daniel Hartwell, reading aloud to his sister. A girl named Penny Gruber, granddaughter of the older man who had sat alone in the Harlow courtroom, writing her name for the first time, with the concentration of someone lifting something heavy. A boy who had come to the first session, unable to hold a pencil correctly, who now pressed through the door on Saturday mornings, already talking about whatever he had been thinking about on the walk from his family's ranch. One Thursday afternoon in April. Penny Gruber did not leave with the others. She waited until the other children were gone, and then she stood at the end of the table with her reader in her arms and said, "Mrs. Walker, my grandfather wants to know if you'd come to supper." Clara looked at her. "My grandfather," Penny said. "Joseph Gruber. He said—" She stopped, tried again with the carefulness of a child conveying an adult message and wanting to get it right. "He said you're the reason we have our land back. He said he never thanked you." Clara sat down in the nearest chair because the weight of it required sitting. She had not thought about Joseph Gruber since the settlement. She had thought about the Hartwells. They were present in her life now, part of the community of the Ridge, but Gruber was farther older, and she had not known how to reach toward him without overstepping. She had not known he had a granddaughter in her school. "Penny," she said, "how long has your grandfather been alone?" "Since grandmother died," Penny said. 4 years. He's not sad all the time. He keeps busy. But he wanted to say thank you, and he doesn't know how to come up here by himself." She paused. "He's 63. He says the mountain road is harder than it used to be." Clara looked at this child 11 years old, carrying her grandfather's gratitude in her arms like a second schoolbook. "Tell your grandfather yes," she said. "Tell him we'll come to supper on Sunday." Penny's face opened like a window. "Both of you. Both of us," Clara said. Joseph Gruber was a small man with large hands, the hands of someone who had worked land for 40 years, and when he shook Clara's hand at his door on Sunday, he held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, not from awkwardness, but from something more deliberate. "I watched what you did," he said. "In that courtroom. Birch told me later what you found in Denver, the document." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't know I had a fight in me until you showed me somebody else fighting." Clara looked at him. "We fought together," she said. "Your testimony was what made the pattern real." "I know," he said. "But somebody had to go first. You went first." He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in. Penny made biscuits. She's been practicing for a week." Supper at Joseph Gruber's table was one of the best evenings Clara could remember, not because it was grand, but because of its specific texture. The old man and the girl, and the two of them eating biscuits that were genuinely excellent, and talking the way people talked when they had real things to say to each other and did not need to be careful. Gruber told them about the land, the 3 years since they'd lost it. The winter, his wife died, the particular grief of losing 2 things at once and not being sure which loss was heavier. He told it plainly without self-pity, the way people tell things when they have processed them enough to speak without breaking. Ethan listened, the way he always listened, completely, without offering anything back, until there was a natural place to offer it. Then he said, "When you got the land back, what was the first thing you did?" Gruber thought about it. A real pause, the kind that meant the question had landed. "I walked every fence line," he said. "Every acre. Took 2 days." He looked at his hands. "I needed to know it was real." Ethan nodded once. "That's right," he said. That's the right thing to do. Clara looked between the two of them. These two men who had each lost things they'd built and had come back to what remained of them, and felt something so complete it had no room for words. Penny Gruber fell asleep in her chair before they left, her head tilted against the wall. Her reader on the table in front of her, still open to the page she'd been showing Clara after supper. Clara marked the page for her and set the book by her hand and did not wake her. The first real test of everything they had built came in June in the second summer. It came not from Aldridge, who had since the settlement retreated to his larger operations in the eastern part of the territory, with the specific quietude of a man who has been publicly embarrassed and is waiting for people to forget, but from somewhere Clara had not anticipated. The Territorial School Board sent a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, and Clara read it at the table, while the children worked on their letters around her, and she read it twice, and then she set it face down on the table and finished the morning session and sent the children home before she showed it to Ethan. He read it. He looked up. "They want to shut you down," he said. "They want to regularize me," Clara said. Which means the same thing. Any educational operation in the territory requires a certified teacher, a recognized building, and oversight from the county school board. She paused. The county school board in Harlow. "Where Coles sits," Ethan said. "Where Coles sits," she said. He put the letter down. He looked at the table, the 8-foot table, the books on the shelf, the slates that the children left stacked in the corner, the whole evidence of something that had grown from nothing into something real. "Birch," he said. "Already written to him," she said. His mouth moved toward that almost smile. "Before you told me." "I knew what you'd say," she said. "What would I say?" "You'd say we fight it," she said. "So I got a head start on the fight." He looked at her for a moment with that expression, the full one, the one that reached the surface without managing, and then he picked up his coffee and said, "What does Birch think?" "He thinks the certification requirement is legitimate, and we should meet it rather than fight it," she said. "He thinks I should apply to the Territorial Board of Education in Denver for teacher certification. Formal examination letter of reference review board." "Can you pass the examination?" Ethan said. She looked at him. "I learned to read 14 months ago," she said. "At a kitchen table. From a man who learned patience from a horse." "That's not an answer." "Yes," she said. "I can pass the examination." He nodded once. "Then we go to Denver again." "We go to Denver again," she said. "But this time I'm going in front of a board, not looking through files." "Different kind of fight," he said. "Same kind of fight," she said. "Just with a different weapon." Denver in June was a different city from Denver in August. Busier, louder, with the particular energy of a place that believed summer was permission. Clara and Ethan arrived on a Wednesday, and the examination was Thursday morning, and she spent Wednesday evening in the hotel room, going through everything she knew in the particular methodical way she had developed for going through things. Not with anxiety, but with the same attention she'd brought to page 11 of a survey document, looking for what was there and what was solid. Ethan sat across from her and read, and did not quiz her or encourage her or do any of the things that would have told her he thought she needed propping up. He was simply present. She had come to understand that this was his most profound form of support. Not the words, but the steady fact of him. The way he made a room feel like a room she was allowed to be in. "I'm not nervous," she said at one point. He looked up from his book. "I'm not," she said. "That's the strange thing. I thought I would be." "Why aren't you?" he said. She thought about it. "Because I know what I know," she said. "Nobody gave it to me. I went and got it. Every page I read, every lesson I taught, every question I figured out how to answer, that's mine. Nobody can tell me it isn't because they weren't there." She paused. "It's different from when I was standing in that street and everything was being decided by other people. This time I know exactly what I have." He looked at her for a moment. "Eliza used to say something like that," he said. "She used to say that a thing you worked for held different than a thing you were given." "She was right," Clara said. "She would have had 100 opinions about your school," he said. She would have argued with you about the reading order and the mathematics approach and whether the children needed more time outside. I would have welcomed every argument, Clara said. He looked at the wall for a moment, the particular way he looked at things that were not there anymore that carried weight. Then he looked back at his book. I know, he said quietly. She would have known that about you. Clara picked up her notes and went back to reviewing them, and the room was quiet. And outside, Denver made its summer noise, and something warm moved between them in the silence that was beyond what words could have done for it. The examination board was 3 people, 2 men and a woman, which Clara had not expected, and which steadied her in a way she did not fully understand until later, when she thought about what it had meant to look across a formal table and see a woman looking back with professional authority. The examination took 4 hours. Reading comprehension, written composition, arithmetic to the level required for primary instruction, and an oral interview on educational philosophy and method that Clara had not been warned about and which turned out to be the part she found most natural. The woman on the board. Her name was Dr. Helen Marsh, Territorial Supervisor of Education, and she had the particular precision of someone who had fought for every credential she held, asked Clara the last question of the oral interview. Miss Bennett. Mrs. Walker, Clara said. Dr. Marsh looked at her notes. Mrs. Walker, why do you teach? Clara considered the question. Because I couldn't read at 26 years old, she said. And because the first time I sounded out a full sentence, I understood something I'd been told my whole life was not available to me. And I thought about how many people were living inside that particular wall, not because they weren't capable, but because nobody had thought it was worth their time to take it down. She paused. I teach because walls are easier to take down than people think if someone is willing to stand on the other side of them long enough. Dr. Marsh looked at her for a moment. Then she made a note. The certification came by post 2 weeks later. Clara read the letter standing at the cabin door where Ethan had handed it to her, and then she read it again, and then she folded it and held it against her chest and stood in the morning sun. Well, Ethan said. She held up the letter. He took it, read it, looked at her. Certified primary educator, he said. Territory of Colorado. Territory of Colorado, she said. He handed it back to her. She held it in both hands and looked at her own name on it. Clara Walker, certified recognized official, and felt the specific weight of a thing that was hers, by right and record, an undeniable fact. She went inside and put it on the shelf. Next to the photograph, the letter and the photograph, the new thing and the thing that had come before it, the life that was and the life that had made the life that was possible, both on the same shelf, both real. She stood back and looked at them for a moment. Then she went to start breakfast because there were children coming at 8, and she had not yet reviewed the morning lesson, and the ordinary sacred business of the day was waiting, as it always waited, with the patience of things that were genuinely important. The summer that followed was the fullest of Clara's life. The school officially, the Walker Ridge Primary School, the name she had written on the application form without particularly intending to make it permanent, and which had simply stuck, ran 5 mornings a week through July and August, with 14 children at the table. Ethan expanded the cabin's front room that summer, adding 4 feet to the east wall, raising the ceiling slightly, installing 2 new windows, and building the kind of bench seating along the walls that a classroom required. He did not call it a classroom. He called it the addition. But he measured it to fit 14 children comfortably, and he built the benches to the right height, and he put a proper blackboard on the east wall that he had ordered from Harlow, and carried up the mountain road himself. Clara ran her hand along the blackboard the first morning and thought of everything she had not known 12 months ago, and everything she knew now, and the distance between the two. Not a distance that could be measured in miles or time, but in something more personal. The distance between the person you were forced to be and the person you actually were, which was sometimes very far, and which could be crossed, but only if someone offered you room to move. Room. That word again. She picked up the chalk and wrote the date on the board, and turned around to face her students. 14 faces. all of them looking at her with the particular attention of children who have decided that something is worth watching. Good morning, she said. Good morning, Mrs. Walker, they said, ragged overlapping the way children said things in groups. She smiled. She had been doing that more smiling at full strength without moderating it. It had taken practice. She was getting better at it. Let's begin, she said. The twist that came in September of the second year was not an attack. It was an invitation. Dr. Helen Marsh arrived at the cabin on a Tuesday without prior notice, which Clara took as either a very good sign or a very bad one, and which turned out to be something she had not considered. Marsh tied her horse and came to the door and accepted coffee, and sat at the table with the directness of someone who did not have patience for approach. I've been reviewing results from primary schools across the territory, she said. Literacy outcomes, progression rates, attendance. She looked at Clara. Your students are outperforming every comparable rural school in the territory. Every one. Clara looked at her. The children in your school, Marsh continued, are reading an average of 14 months ahead of comparable students elsewhere. 2 of your students, the Hartwell boy and the Gruber girl, have tested at secondary level. Daniel and Penny, Clara said. They work very hard. What are you doing differently? Marsh said. Clara thought about it. Really thought, because the question deserved a real answer and not the modest deflection she could have given. I know what it feels like to be told you can't, she said. I know what it feels like to sit in front of the page and believe the page is meant for someone else. I never let my students believe that. Not for a single morning. She paused. And I don't teach them that reading is a skill. I teach them that it's a door. Once they understand it's a door, they can't stop wanting to open it. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. I want to offer you a position, she said. Territorial Education Advisor, Rural Schools. Your job would be to travel to one-room schools across the Northern Territory and train teachers in your methods. 2 weeks per school. You'd keep your school here. The territory would fund a second teacher to run it in your absence. The room went very quiet. How much travel? Clara said. 6 months a year, Marsh said. Roughly. You'd be home from October to March. Clara looked at Ethan, who had been at the far end of the room and who had not until now indicated that he was listening with his full attention. He was. She could see it in the way he was holding himself. Not tense, not worried, just present with the full weight of what was being offered. That's a significant amount of time away, Clara said to Marsh. I'd need to think about it. Of course, Marsh said. She finished her coffee. I'll leave the formal offer with you. Read it through. She looked between them. I should tell you the Territorial Board of Education voted on this. Unanimously. That is not a common thing. She paused at the door. Mrs. Walker, we had 100 applicants for that position. Most of them had more credentials than you did 6 months ago. None of them had what you have. She stopped. We don't always know what we need until we see it. She left. Clara sat at the table with the formal offer in front of her and looked at the words without reading them. Ethan, she said. Don't ask me what I think, he said. He came and sat across from her. You know what I think. I want to hear it anyway, she said. He looked at the offer, then at her. I think you're going to spend 6 months a year riding around the territory teaching people to teach, he said. And I think that's going to be harder and stranger and more worthwhile than anything you've done yet. And I think the mountain will be here when you come home. She looked at him. You'll be alone again, she said. Half the year. I know how to be alone, he said. I'm considerably better these days at being the other thing. He held her gaze. And I'll have 14 children here 5 mornings a week apparently, plus their parents, plus Birch, riding up to be insufferable, plus Joseph Gruber and Penny for Sunday supper. He paused. I won't be as alone as you think. She felt the warmth of everything he had just said. The complete picture of a life they had built, the web of it. The people in it. The way a ridge that had held one solitary man for 7 years now held a community of people who had found their way to its edges and stayed. All right, she said. All right, he said. I'm going to take it, she said. He nodded once, the way he always nodded once, complete, meaning it fully. She left for the first assignment in April of the following year. She rode out on Juneau in the early morning with a saddlebag of books and a leather case of lesson materials that she had organized and reorganized 3 times the week before, and she came to the edge of the yard and looked back. Ethan was on the porch. He had his coffee. He was watching her the way he had watched everything since the first morning she'd brought a second mug out and left it on the railing steadily without performance meaning it. She had said everything the night before. All the things that needed saying she had said quietly at the table, and he had said his back, and there was nothing remaining that required words. She tipped her hat. The gesture she had learned from him, the plainness of it, the completeness of it. He lifted his coffee mug. She turned Juneau and rode down the mountain road, and she did not look back again because she did not need to. She knew exactly what was behind her. She worked in 8 schools that first season. She was gone 17 weeks. She came home on a November afternoon with the first snow just beginning on the upper ridge, and she rode into the yard and dismounted and stood in front of the cabin and listened. From inside, she could hear Ethan's voice, reading aloud. He did that she knew read aloud in the evenings when there was no one else in the cabin, a habit he had gotten from his years of solitary winters. But this evening, there was another voice responding small young, asking a question about a word. She pushed the door open. Ethan was at the table with Penny Gruber, who had apparently decided that the school's fall session and Mrs. Walker's absence were not reasons to stop progressing, and had been judging by the books spread across the table, working with Ethan directly. Both of them looked up. Penny's face broke into the particular undisguised joy of a child who has been waiting for something, and it has arrived. Mrs. Walker. Ethan looked at Clara across the room. She crossed to the table and looked at what they'd been reading. Secondary mathematics. Penny was 12 years old and working through secondary mathematics at the table in the cabin on the ridge. "You taught her this," Clara said to Ethan. "She taught herself," he said. "I held the book." Clara looked at Penny. "What do you want to be?" she said. Penny did not hesitate. "A teacher," she said. "Like you." Clara sat down at the table. "Then we have work to do," she said. "Show me where you are." Ethan got up and went to make coffee, because that was what there was to do when everything was exactly right. Make coffee, hold the book, be present for the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a child becoming what she intended to be. Years moved the way. Years did on a mountain, not slowly exactly, but with the particular quality of time that is full rather than fast, that looks brief from the outside and vast from the inside. Daniel Hartwell, at 17, took work as a surveyor's apprentice. The irony was not lost on anyone. He was meticulous with his instruments, and would not, Ethan told Clara privately, be the kind of surveyor who made specific mistakes in specific places. Penny Gruber earned her teaching certificate at 19. She taught for 2 years at the Walker Ridge Primary School while Clara traveled, and then she took a school of her own in the Southern Valley, and she taught there for 30 years, and the people she taught went on to teach others, and the chain of it went further than any of them could have traced. Joseph Gruber walked up the mountain road every Sunday for 11 years until his legs would not allow it, and then Ethan rode down to him. That continued until the old man died at 74 with Penny holding his hand and the land underneath him that he had walked fence line by fence line to confirm was real. Birch retired from law at 68 and wrote a history of land fraud in the Colorado Territory that included a chapter about the Walker case. He sent Clara the first copy off the press with a note that said, "You were right about the G. You were right about most things." Margaret Haskell wrote from Kansas every few months. The letters were not long. They were not warm in the way warmth was easy. They were real, the correspondence of 2 people who had caused each other damage and were navigating carefully what remained. Clara wrote back every time. She did not know if it was forgiveness. She thought it might be something more durable than forgiveness, the decision to remain in contact with the full truth of a thing without requiring it to be simpler than it was. On a September evening, in the 13th year, Clara Walker sat on the porch of the cabin that had become the center of something she had not been able to imagine when she first saw it. Not just a home, but a landmark, the kind of place that people referred to when they meant something more than a building. She had just come back from her fall circuit. 6 schools this year. One of them, a new one, she had helped found in a mining camp 40 miles north. She was tired in the good way, the way of effort that had been worth it. Ethan came out and sat beside her. How was 51 now? The dark hair was gray at the temples and in his beard, and the years had settled into him, the way years settled into men who worked outdoors and had learned to carry what they carried without putting it down in ways that damaged the people around them. He was still steady. He was, if anything, more so the way good structures became more themselves over time, more fully what they had always been built to be. They sat together in the September evening and looked at the valley below and the mountains beyond that. "Penny's school won the territorial award," Clara said. "The letter came while I was away." "I know," he said. "She wrote to tell me. She said to tell you it was your fault." Clara smiled. "How are the children?" She said the current one's this year's 14. "The Fry girl figured out long division this week," he said. "She came in Monday morning and put it on the board before I even had the coffee on. Just walked in and wrote it out and stood back and looked at it." "How did she look?" "Like a person who just found out they could do something they didn't know they could do," he said. She knew that look. She had worn that look herself once, sitting at this table with a red-covered book and a man who did not quit on her reading her first full sentence out loud into the air of a mountain cabin, and feeling the shapes on the page become meaning, become something she could hold. She reached over and took his hand. He held it the way he held everything she offered him, carefully, completely, like something worth keeping. "I was thinking about something," she said. "What?" "The day I left Cutter's Creek," she said. "I had nothing. I said that to you. I remember I said I had nothing. The clothes on my back and whatever was in that bag." "I remember," he said. "I was wrong," she said. "I had everything I have now. It was just compressed, unspent." She paused. "The stubbornness, the attention, the way I looked at things and found what didn't add up. I had all of it. I just hadn't had room to use it." He was quiet for a moment. "You had more than that," he said. "You had the thing that doesn't compress, the thing nobody can take." "What's that?" she said. He looked at her. In the evening light in the 13th year, with everything they had built between them and around them and beyond them, in Penny's classroom and Daniel's survey instruments, and Joseph Gruber's walked fence lines, and the chain of children learning to read in schools across the Northern Territory. "The part that chose," he said, "in that street, with no evidence that it would go well. The part that chose anyway." She looked at him. She thought about that day, the dust and the summer heat, and her mother's voice and Roland's hand on her arm, and the crowd that watched and said nothing, and the wagon she had been about to climb into when a horse came down the mountain road, and a man she did not know asked if she was all right. She thought about what it had taken to step away from that wagon. "It wasn't courage," she said. "I was terrified." "I know," he said. "That's what courage is." She squeezed his hand once. The evening light moved across the valley below them, golden and long, and full of the particular beauty of high summer, turning toward fall, of things coming to fruition, of a world that was still going, and would keep going in directions none of them could see. From inside the cabin, the sounds of a home, the fire, the settling of the logs, the particular silence of a place where people were at ease. On the shelf inside, a letter and a photograph. The new thing and the thing that made the new thing possible. Both exactly where they belonged. Clara Walker sat on her porch in the September evening and looked at the life she had built from nothing but herself, and she did not find it remarkable. That was the final thing, the thing that had taken the longest to arrive. She had stopped finding it remarkable, not because it wasn't, but because it had become simply true, the way all the most important things eventually became simply true. She was here. She had chosen to be here. She was the woman the world had once thrown away, and she had become quietly and without ceremony the woman the mountain remembered. Not because she was saved, because she chose. That was the whole of it.